Okay, good morning.
Hello.
Today is 22 June, the year 2012. I'm Dr. Dave Thompson, a volunteer at the Palm Springs Air Museum here in Palm Springs, California. As part of the Veterans History Project of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., we conduct interviews of veterans and civilians who participated in our country's military conflicts. Today, I'm here at the museum along with fellow volunteer Don Kircher, and today we have the honor and the privilege of interviewing Lieutenant Rich, better known as Red Ryder. Lieutenant Ryder was a deck officer aboard the Oriskany and the Kittyhawk during Vietnam. So we're going to talk to him about that and a lot of other things. Red, so good to have you here.
Thank you, Doctor.
Okay. Now, I'm going to get you lined up here first. Okay. Sleeve that, see some of that jacket you got on there. Okay. Red, first of all, tell me when and where were you born?
I was born in Miami, Florida, 1945, 18 June, 1945.
Making you how many years young?
67 as of a few days ago.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
happy birthday. And would you repeat and spell your full name for us, please?
Richard, R-I-C-H-A-R-D, James, J-A-M-E-S, Ryder, R-Y-D-E-R.
Well, Red Ryder was R-Y-D-E-R, wasn't he?
Yes.
In the comic books and the movies?
What happened, Doc, when I checked into my first squadron, which was VF-191, the XO, executive officer of the squadron, took me to meet the skipper, and the skipper was reading the funny papers at that moment. And the XO told the skipper, Skipper, we have a new officer. At that time, I think it was Lieutenant J.G., or maybe even Ensign Richard Ryder. And the skipper must have just have read the comic by Red Ryder. And he said, no, it's not Richard, it's Red. And so that was 1969, and it's stuck ever since.
And where was Little Beaver at this point?
You know, I don't know. I hope he was engaged, but I don't know where he was.
You can move over that way if you want to, Don, if you get a little bit of view. Yeah. Well, for these Army folk type here over here, ensign
Is equivalent to a second lieutenant, a brown bar.
And why don't you just go up the ranks and do
ensign is a brown bar. A Lieutenant J.G. junior grade is a silver bar, and lieutenant in the Navy, 03, is the equivalent of a captain in the Army. 04 is a lieutenant commander in the Navy, a major in the Army. 05 is a commander, lieutenant colonel. 06 is a Navy captain, equivalent of an Army colonel.
Yep, that's it. I remember that well. I got up to lieutenant commander.
Good.
Okay, well, let's talk about, take your hat off there for a moment and
Sure.
tell me, tell me what, okay, I always said Kittyhawk, CBA 63, but what's the other things you got on there?
Well, of course,
Here,
on
put it up a little higher. I'll hold it. Here, take it. Yeah. You
of course, on the left side is the highest rank I attained while aboard the Kittyhawk, and that was 03 Navy lieutenant, senior lieutenant. And on the right side of the cap, no, I'm sorry, the left side, the flag depicted on the cap is the First Navy Jack. The First Navy Jack is a flag that has been worn for hundreds of years in the U.S. Navy service, and for many years up until 9/11, only the oldest active duty warship in the fleet, not counting the rigger, the sailing ship Constitution, I think, in Philadelphia, but not counting that, the oldest active duty ship in the fleet was designated to wear or to display the First Navy Jack. But after 9/11, SecNav authorized all squadrons and ships in the fleet to wear the First Navy Jack. The flag itself is striped, as you can see. It's got a rattlesnake across the middle of it, and below the rattlesnake, it says, "Don't tread on me." And it's a distinctive flag and is worn with great pride by the active duty service people.
And your ribbons there are?
The ribbons, the Hawk, when I was on the Hawk was awarded back-to-back Naval Unit commendations, NUCs, NUCs, for the tour in 71 and 72. And then I have the Vietnam Service Medal ribbon, and then the Vietnam Campaigns ribbons. So those are just three of the ribbons that I've received while aboard the Hawk, and so I just displayed that.
Good. Okay, yeah, I can put it back on if you want, or either on or off, whichever. Okay, let's talk about your jacket then. And what are some of the?
Well, in I guess it was 1969.
And this is your original jacket.
This is my original jacket. I was issued this jacket when I checked into flight school, and that would have been in March or 1st of April of '68. And in those days, there was no, unlike present time, as I'm told, you could put almost anything that you wanted on your jacket. Although most of the junior officers that I knew at the time didn't put anything but a name tag on their jacket and just kept it clean. And the more time you had in the Navy, the more things you would put on it. So this first patch here is the very first squadron that I was assigned to. We call it a RAG squadron, Replacement Air Group, VF 124. In those years, we were training in F-8s, and when I left the Rio training in I think the first part of '69, I got orders to VF 124 to get ready to go to the fleet as a maintenance or ordnance officer, one of the two. And so this was my first squadron, VF 124, still in existence now, but they, I think that they switched with from different airplanes, from F-8s to F-4s to F-14s, and probably the F-18s now, and so forth. This other patch over here was my first squadron after the RAG. When I actually went to the fleet, it was VF 191, Satan's Kittens, and that was the squadron in which the skipper, Commander Ray Donnelly, who was later promoted, became CEO of NAS Miramar, and the skipper was reading the funny papers, and that's where I got the designation Red Ryder.
And was that on the Kittyhawk?
No, that was the first carrier that I was aboard, was the Oriskany in CVA 34, which was sunk a few years ago off the coast of Pensacola, and is now the world's largest artificial reef. And I have a tape that is of the actual sinking of the ship. She was a wonderful ship, and there was concern as the ship was settling towards the bottom, being flooded, and was settling towards the bottom. She was canted off at an angle, and the engineers were concerned that she was going to settle on the bottom at an angle. But being a wonderful warrior as she was, just before she bottomed out, she rolled back and set on the bottom of the sea, perfectly vertical. So she did her job right up until the end, still doing it off the coast of Pensacola. VF 191, we flew F-8s, which is a single-seat fighter with a cannon, and for a short while during the tour, the Navy experimented with having this, they call this Crusader, F-8 Crusader, is called the last of the gunfighters, because at that time it was the last combat fighter plane that had a weapon cannon aboard. But somebody in the Department of the Navy decided that we could drop bombs off of these fighter planes. And so the experiment, which only lasted about 1 or 2 months, as I recall, we had to scramble around and try and figure out how we were going to put the bomb ejector platforms, how we were going to attach them to the wings, which wasn't a real problem. But the problem was explaining to these fighter pilots that didn't have that recent bomb dropping experience. Maybe they did in flight school. But so I think that experience went for a line period or two. A line period was typically 30 days or more. Then we'd go back into to rearm and refuel for 4 or 5 days. I think it lasted a line period or two, but it wasn't continued because the F-8 Crusader is a fighter, and it wasn't designed to drop bombs, unlike the fighter bomber Phantoms, the F-4 Phantoms, which came along after the F-8s.
Do you want to take your jacket off and show me the back?
Sure, of
we'll
course.
take a look at the back.
Here, this patch is just Gulf of Tonkin Yacht Club. It was like anybody that served in the Gulf of Tonkin area, we designated ourselves members of the Gulf of Tonkin Yacht Club, and
That's funny.
our Tonkin Gulf Yacht Club, and this is a patch that I just picked up. It doesn't really mean anything. I just like the look of it. My little brother was a Marine infantryman in 1969, and he was shot up. And my wife sent me a telegram, so my Skipper Donnelly, said to go see my brother. He was in bad shape. So a day or so later, I went to see him, and after visiting him in the hospital, I went into town. I saw this patch, so I bought this patch. So that's where that
he wasn't on a hospital ship. He was
medevaced from I think near Da Nang, where he was ambushed, and medevaced to Yokosuka, Japan, to the Navy Marine Corps Hospital in Yokosuka, and so that's where I caught up with him a day or so after he was shot up. So he was discharged, and he's doing fine now. He has serious disability his whole life from that wound. But
where was he wounded?
He was hit in 3 different places. He was all the nerves under his right arm were essentially shot out, and has resulted in a limited use of his right arm since age 19. He's now 5 years younger than me, so he's now 62. He was also shot in the knee and the ankle. So, but he survived those, and he went and had a good business career, and now is enjoying fishing and hunting in North Florida, where we live.
Okay.
These patches, this is the Crusader patch from the F-8 Squadron, VF-191 and VF-124. This is the patch for CTF-77. That was, I think, either the 71 or 72 cruise. CTF-77, Carrier Task Force 77, was the attacking force in the Operation Linebacker, and I think Linebacker started in 1971. Linebacker was the operation that essentially mined all the waterways around Haiphong Harbor, which fed supplies to Hanoi, 40 or 50 miles apart. Hanoi is about 40 or 50 miles inland from Haiphong Harbor. And CTF-77 and its air group, I think, deposited thousands of mines which cut off the supply route to Hanoi, which then made Hanoi eventually run out of their SAM missiles and left them defenseless to our B-52s, and may have had an important part in why the POWs were eventually released in December of '72. I think Linebacker 1 started in around in '71, and Linebacker 2 started in December '72.
Were there other carriers besides the Kittyhawk involved in that?
Yeah, the Kittyhawk was the carrier on which the admiral in charge of CDF-77 was deployed, was the flagship. And when Kittyhawk was there, the admiral was on Kittyhawk. But when Kittyhawk was relieved and sent back to the States, then the admiral went aboard a different ship. Could have been Ranger, could have been Constellation, could have been Forrestal, could have been.
But I get was there more than one carrier at a time involved in Linebacker?
I believe that. I'm not sure on this information. I'm sure is available on the net, but I believe at any one time up in the up north, we staged in a geographic location coordinates. We called it Yankee Station.
Yeah.
Well, Yankee Station wasn't really a station. It was just some geographic coordinates which identified our position, which was up off of the west coast of Chinese Communist Tainan Island, up to the west and to the north of Tainan Island, and about 150 nautical miles southeast of Haiphong, Hanoi. And that was essentially the Yankee Station area. And I believe that at any one time there were 3 carriers deployed at Yankee Station. And one of those carriers had the admiral aboard, and typically that was the Kittyhawk when we were there. Just to kind of tie the knot, there was another coordinates called Dixie Station. Dixie Station was down south, just would have been east of Da Nang, not Da Nang, I'm sorry, what's now called Ho Chi Minh City, Saigon. Yeah, so that essentially was Dixie Station. But we never operated down in Dixie Station. We, Kittyhawk and Oriskany, I don't believe we ever, maybe Oriskany once, but Kittyhawk never operated as far as I remember.
I had heard
south.
of Yankee Station. I never heard of Dixie Station before.
Dixie Station is maybe
south,
more of a sailor's lingo. I'm not sure if it was official.
Yeah, that's a Yankee Station. I remember. Yeah.
This patch, so that's the CDF-77 patch, I think, for the 71 cruise. This is my patch for VT-10. When I completed VT-10, that was the Rio radar intercept officer who sits in the backseat of F-4s and also F-14s and other airplanes. Part of the training was you went through VT-10, which was in Pensacola, and when you completed VT-10, then you went for further training. And when I completed VT-10, I was awarded this patch. This patch is when I was in the reserves. Before I was in the reserve squadron VF-301 at NAS Miramar, I was in a RTU, reserve something unit, a 301. That was before you went to the big squadron. You were in this reserve training unit, RTU, reserve training unit. You trained in this squadron, same airplanes, before you were transferred to the big reserve squadron, BF-301.
Oh, okay.
And
that's great.
And so that's basically a track record of my assignments.
Super. Well, let's kind of go back now. So you were born in Miami, you said?
In Miami, Florida.
And your dad, what was his name?
Robert J. Joseph Ryder.
And what did he do?
He was the co-director of a corporation which he and his brothers organized called Ryder Protective Agency. They were similar to other protective agencies. Their job was to provide private security to racetracks up and down the East Coast. For example, Atlantic City Racetrack, Gulfstream Racetrack in Florida, Roosevelt Raceway were some of the tracks that my father was a director at. And so that's what he principally did. But we also had one of the first horse farms, thoroughbred horse farms in Ocala. When I was older, the family moved from Miami to North Florida, to Ocala, Florida, which at that time was just beginning. This was in the 50s, I think, just beginning to expand their horse raising industry, thoroughbred racehorses. And my father and mother acquired 350 acres, and my father was away at work most of the time, and my mother developed a 350 acre vegetable farm into a 350 acre horse farm and cattle farm. So that's where we were raised.
And your dad, how did he end up in Florida? Where did his ancestors come from and stuff?
The Ryders come from South Boston, the Irish stock who immigrated, I guess, in the middle of the 1800s and settled in South Boston. And family lore is that I've never really seen it officially, but the Ryders were into police work and fireman work. One of my great grandfathers, I'm told, was an early commissioner of the fire department in South Boston, or something. That was his position. My father's father was on the Boston Police Department, and I think that there was some type of a strike by the Boston Police Department at some point in time, and my grandfather left the Boston Police Department. This is unverified as far as I'm concerned, but left the Boston Police Department and took his family, including my father, south, and they settled in Miami. And my mother's family lived in Miami, and they met at Miami High School. And
do you know what part of Ireland that they came from?
County Cork, I believe, which is down in the south.
Well, your mother, what was her name and her maiden name?
My mother's name is Anne, A-N-N-E. Prosser is her maiden name, Anne Prosser. And her family were integral in the citrus industry in Florida. And although at the time I'm not sure how involved. In later years, my mother's uncle was one of the most influential Floridians in the development, as I'm told, of Florida citrus, and how getting the citrus north to the northern markets, including the refrigerated railroad cars, which he had a hand in, and he had a hand in the development. So that's where they met up.
And how did where did her ancestors come from? How did they end up in Florida?
My mother always said she was not Irish. My mother always said that she was Welsh, that her people came from Wales, and I don't doubt that. The padre at our church one time said to her, I forget something, he was from Ireland, and he made a comment to her, and she let the Padre know that she was not Irish. But she was Catholic, but not Irish.
Not Catholic, but okay. So, how old were you when you left Miami then?
I think when we had been going north to Ocala for some period of time, but mostly for vacationing, and my mother was looking for a particular piece of property, just like they eventually found. And so I was probably, when we officially moved, I would have been, I think, a freshman in high school.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's go back. So you spent a fair amount of time in Miami then.
Right.
Where did you live in Miami? You remember the house that you lived in?
Sure. We lived in a suburb in north called Miami Shores, and it was 106th Street, northeast 106th Street and 6th Avenue, and we had a beautiful home. And my father was a scratch golfer, and our home was on a golf course, the Miami Shores Country Club, and my father enjoyed. He worked hard, but he was also a great athlete. By the way, my father's in the Football Hall of Fame for the Miami High School, inducted for the class in the early 30s, and so my father was a great athlete and a good golfer. So we had a beautiful home in Miami Shores, lived there, and I went first to St. Rosa Lima Catholic School, and then later on I talked my dad into letting me switch over to the public school where many of my friends went.
What was the name of that?
Well, I think it was junior high school by that time. I went to Horace Mann Junior High School in Miami Shores area. And then later, just before we moved to Ocala, I wanted to play football, but I had played football, Pop Warner League, all along for many years, since age maybe 7 or 8. And I asked my dad if he would let me go to Miami Edison High School, since Miami Edison High School at the time was one of the top schools in the state for football, as opposed to Archbishop Curley High School, the Catholic school, which was a great school. And one of my regrets is that I asked my dad to let me go to Edison instead of sending me to Curley, because I think my really lifelong friends all went to Curley, and I went to Edison, and my football career didn't go anywhere. Although I lettered in swimming at Miami Edison, I didn't letter at football. So that's.
And you have brothers and sisters?
My older brother Stephen is deceased, and my younger brother Kenneth was the Marine who was wounded in Vietnam in '69, and then my younger sister, my little sister Cecilia, is a school teacher in Tampa now.
All right.
So,
So what did your kids, like when you were in grade school, what did you do for fun?
sports, almost nothing else. I remember nothing else but sports. It would be, except not basketball. I never developed basketball. Played football and baseball and swam.
Mm-hmm.
And
You swam in the ocean, or
no, in competitive in the pools.
Oh.
We swam in the ocean too for fun, but
Yeah.
for training purposes, we swam.
What was your best stroke?
I was a freestyler and a backstroker, and on the team at Miami Edison, I was pretty good. And if I'd have been as good in football as I was in swimming, I'd have been happier, I think.
What position did you play in football?
I was a third string running back and a second or third string defensive back. I usually was one of those players that got in when we were way ahead. We were never way behind. And so
they still had a pretty good team when you were there?
Yeah. I didn't play at Miami Edison because it was just my freshman year,
Oh, okay.
and we moved north. but when I played in the Pop Warner leagues, those were the positions that I played. And that would have been the position that I would have gone out for at Miami Edison.
Yeah. So, and what parish did you belong to then?
It's St. Rose of Lima.
St. Rose of Lima.
Yeah.
How far was that from your house?
A block. You know.
Were you an altar boy?
I was not an altar boy because I was too. You know, my parents wanted me to do that, but I begged off, luckily, because I claimed that I was in one sport or another, and I didn't have time.
Did you have any odd jobs?
In those years, yeah, sold newspapers in Miami Shores, the little suburb of Miami Shores. Sold them at a stand outside of I think an A&P grocery store.
What's the first car you remember your family having?
Of 1952 blue Hudson.
Yeah.
And then I got a 1953 green Hudson, I think. Yeah. And then those were the first cars that I remember. And then 54 Ford station wagon, 50, those years, 56 and so forth.
And which was the first car you drove then?
My dad brought me a 1963 Chevy Bel Air. He came home from his work in New Jersey, and he brought me this new gray 1963 Chevy Bel Air. Nice little car, But he said, don't get too attached to it because next year I've got something else in mind. And so the next year when he came back, he brought me back, maybe it was a 62 Chevy Bel Air, because the next year he brought me back a 1963 Corvette Stingray, split screen. This is the original Corvette Stingray, hardtop with the split screens in the back, a small block engine like a 327 or something like that. Just a great car, And I was like in Ocala, Florida, which is basically at that time and still is a rural community with a bunch of cowboys and farm workers, which I was too. To have a Chevrolet Corvette, that distinctive model, was a real.
What color was it?
It was the original color scheme was blue and white, or blue and gray and white. The original Stingray color scheme. And my older brother Steve, used to always kid me that I was the best looking man on four wheels. Because that's why all the girls were interested.
So okay, you're in Ocala now. You get to go there like for your sophomore year, more or less. And
what happened was I went and I started my freshman year at a high school which was a mile away from our farm. Our farm was maybe 15 miles away from Ocala. We were north of Ocala in a small town called Anthony, which is now a big horse farming community. Our farm was the first private horse farm developed in Anthony area, and it has many farms now. But I went as a freshman to Anthony High School, and Anthony High School played 8-man football. Football was a big part of my life at that, although I was not at the level of my father's ability. I liked the game, but I was not a superstar. But Anthony High School, being a small school, played 8-man football. And I thought that was not where I wanted to be. So I asked my mom, my dad was working, I asked my mom if I could go in, if she would take me into town, Ocala, and enroll me at Ocala High School, which had the 11-man football. And she said, okay, well, she would do that. And before I could get there, we went to Miami. I think it was before I could get to Ocala High School. We went to Miami for a Christmas holiday because that's where really all of our friends were. And lo and behold, I got hit by a car and was unconscious. I was on the handlebars of a bike at night, got hit from behind by a drunk driver, and both the driver of the bike and myself were badly injured. I was unconscious for 17 days, and finally came out of that, which is another story, but came out of that and recuperated through swimming. Essentially, when I came out of the hospital, I was virtually unable to do anything. Couldn't write, couldn't talk clearly, but my dad got me in as soon as possible into swimming. So I got to the point at the country club pool where I could swim a mile at a time. And so it took me about a year to rehabilitate myself, but then I went back into, I repeated the freshman year and started the freshman year over again, but my father wouldn't let me play football until he finally let me play in my junior year, but he wouldn't let me play in my up until then because of the head injury. You know, the head injury essentially resolved itself. The concussion, you know, I passed a year, 2 years worth of flight physicals. I never failed a flight physical at all. You know, and so.
Did you have any broken bones when you got in
just
that?
my head. I broke bones in rodeo. I rodeoed some when I was an older guy, still looking for the need for speed, as we used to say, in the NAV. When I got out of the NAV and the war wasn't going on and there was not all this excitement, I was looking around for exciting things to do. And we rode a lot on horses and were around cattle and all those things for all those years. So I decided to try out rodeoing at the professional level, and rode in 13 pro rodeos, got bucked off every time, and broke my nose, broke some ribs, separated my shoulder.
So okay, on the farm, you had thoroughbreds?
We raised thoroughbreds, but we also had riding horses that we helped move the cattle around, and just my parents gave each of us horses. I don't think my older brother Steve was I don't think he ever rode. He was basically reared totally in Miami, and then just came up north when we moved to the farm. So he wasn't really, although he was good with horses, big, strong fellow, and he could manhandle a horse, a colt. He didn't ride, but my little brother and my little sister and I rode.
When you said you moved the cattle around. Is it kind of like you see in the cowboy movies where the horse and the rider kind of work as a team, and the horse kind of knows how to get the cattle where they're supposed to go?
I'd say it's the horse. I'd say it's the horse that knows, that does everything. If you've got a horse that's been trained around cattle and knows how to work cattle, you know, you essentially just are on board. And if you keep off the reins, just like a lot of the pilots when I was in the NAV, you know, would say how important it was sometimes to stay off the stick and stay off the rudder pedals, you know, for various reasons. If you're on a horse that knows what he's doing, you know, he'll cut the cattle himself. Basically, you're just there, basically, to lead him back to the barn when he's finished cutting the cattle. And in fact, I roped some in the rodeo days, and team roped, and had some good roping horses. And you essentially, the horse will set you up for the throw. I was called a header. In team roping, there's two ropers. The heeler, he ropes the back legs of the calf, and the header ropes the front end. And so I was a header, and you're your roping horse typically will put you in the ideal position. You don't do anything but throw the rope. The horse will put you in the ideal position to make the throw. And then, once the horse sees you've made the throw and made the catch, in other words, the loop goes over the horns, and you go to the dally, which means you go around the horn, the horse will automatically turn to the right and stop the calf, turn the calf. And that essentially, they're trained. They just do that, instinctive. You don't do anything. You make the catch and do the dally, and the horse, roping horse, will do everything else.
And how many thoroughbreds did you have on the farm usually?
Oh, year to year, we would maybe have 5 or 6 mares in foal at any one time, and so we would have, say, 3 to 4 yearlings every year, and what we would do, we would, when they got to be yearlings, we'd send them to the big farm, Ocala Stud Farm, which is in Ocala, for breaking and train. We broke them on our farm. Matter of fact, my father and I and a handyman built a half-mile training track on our farm in one of the paddocks of our farm. We actually bought the post. We dug the posts by hand. My father measured out the half-a-mile track, and it was just a nice track. We built a starting gate, which was all wood, but it looked like a real starting gate, had a bell and everything. And so we would break our colts and our fillies on the farm. We would have like an exercise boy come out and actually ride them around the track. And then at some point in their training, we would send them to the big farm, Ocala Stud Farm, and for further training. And then Ocala Stud Farm would send them down to Hialeah for further training or racing, or one year, I think it was 1963, our colt, one of our colts that we sent to Hialeah with Ocala Stud Farm in their annual competition, which is a major statewide competition, our colt from our little farm was voted the most outstanding colt in the state of Florida. And that was 1963. My father was a great big strong guy. He was leading this colt, Ryder's Request. Turned out to be a good horse too, and he was leading the horse around the show ring with all the other horses that were in competition. And finally, it was just Ryder's Request. Everybody else was eliminated, and Ryder's Request was the last horse standing. And so we got a big trophy, and that horse went on to be a good horse, won some big races. But at any one time, we'd have maybe 4 or 5 colts and fillies. Colts are the male,
Right.
the male, and the fillies are the females. And we'd have maybe 40 to 50 head of Hereford, sometimes Hereford cattle, sometimes other strains of cattle.
And the other horses, what kind were they?
The ones we rode,
Yeah.
they were quarter horses.
Uh-huh.
And
Well, the temperament between a quarter horse and a thoroughbred, is a difference?
I think thoroughbreds are more on edge, especially the ones at the track or the ones in training. They're athletes, and they know they're athletes, and they know what they're supposed to do. So they're a little bit more on edge, maybe a little bit more flighty, even the colts, and certainly the fillies, than the quarters. The quarters are used to rough housing a little bit, getting up and close and personal with the cattle and things like that. So they're a little bit easier to operate. Although when I quit rodeoing myself, I was roping, and I had a quarter horse that was off the track, and great speed, a beautiful looking horse, but he used to buck me off, you know. And so finally, after he bucked me off once or twice, and one time broke some ribs, I was producing rodeos at the time. And so my rodeo contractor, the guy that provides the stock to the rodeo, and I did the other end of getting everything else but the stock at the rodeos. I told him, I said, Roy, why don't you take this horse? I called him Rodeo, was the name I gave that horse, Rodeo. I said, take Rodeo to the rodeo and use him as a bucker or as a flag horse. It's a real pretty horse, you know. And so that's what he did. My horse Rodeo, who bucked me off many times, became a real rodeo horse. Yeah. And I had been,
like in the movie with that have been out lately and stuff. I mean, they talk how a horse they want to beat the other horses. I mean, it's a real competition that they, like you said, they are real athletes.
Oh, they're athletes. They on race day, a horse knows instinctively when it's race day because his routine is changed. Normally on non-race days, you take them out and you gallop a mile or something, or when you're building up for a race, you might send them and time them for 6 furlongs or get some speed checks on him building up for his race. But the more and more that happens, the more and more they know that their day is coming up. And on race day, their routine has changed, that they don't get fed the same way. They get their feed is lighter. They don't go out and gallop, and they know that, and they can hear the crowds and going on. So they know that they're up, and when they go to the track, they're athletes. They are, you know, a lot of times a jockey will get bucked off a racehorse or fall off a racehorse, and the horse will continue the race, and many times without that weight, the horse will win the race on its own, you know, and that's just, they are competitors. They'll never quit on you, you know. So the thing about horses that's different from a bull, and I never rode bulls, a horse will jump over you or run away from you if they buck you off like a bucking horse, but a bull will buck you off and come back after you.
Did you rode bulls too?
No,
Oh,
I never
you
rode
didn't.
bulls.
Okay, so you're in high school. You finished high school at Ocala High?
Yeah, I graduated in Ocala High a year. I should have graduated in '63, but I lost the year
Right.
for the accident, so I graduated in the class of '64. And
Did you have a church near your home that you went to?
let's see, Blessed Trinity was the church in Ocala, and now there's the Trinity High School, where many of the superior athletes from the state of Florida are developed at Trinity High School.
I've heard of that one.
Yeah, Trinity is, I think, Trinity is where the Florida quarterback of last year, who had a rough career playing behind Tim Tebow, he came out of Trinity. So Trinity was the name of the parish that I was at. And,
Yeah. So you graduated from high school. Did you have any special girlfriends in high school or anything?
I had one special girlfriend from about the 11th grade on, and the problem was her family was very ardently Baptist, and my family was solidly Catholic, and it was difficult, you know. And so finally, they sent her after graduation to some Baptist school in Mississippi, and you know we kept up for a while. But
What was her name?
her name was Martha Cates, and just a beautiful girl. Not as beautiful as my wife Barbara, but beautiful enough. And then she met a Baptist girl, a Baptist guy up at one of the schools, so that was the end of that story. But coincidentally, I was fortunate enough to, at the University of Florida, meet my wife of 45 years, Barbara Shreve, who had transferred to the University of Florida from the University of Richmond. And we met on a blind date. One of my fraternity brothers needed me to fill in on a blind date, and so I met Barbara on a blind date, and that was the end of it. We got married as students in '67 on the campus at the St. Augustine Catholic Chapel on the University of Florida, and then as soon as we graduated. She graduated in December of '67, and I graduated we were on quarters at that time. I graduated in March of '68 and was commissioned because I had done the 2 previous summers at Pensacola as a aviation reserve officer candidate. So I completed that training, so I was commissioned as soon as I got my diploma from Florida. And then we drove that day to Pensacola to start flight school. I had changed cars by that day. I mentioned it because, in passing, I was now driving a red 1966 Corvette convertible. Brand new.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Now Barbara, was she Catholic when you met her?
No, they're Baptist. Yeah.
Barbara was Baptist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but it was just one of those things. I immediately fell in love with Barbara, and I think she was attracted to me, and I just
That red convertible.
Yeah, I was the best looking man on 4 wheels, but
so did she grow up in Richmond, Virginia?
She's from the Washington D.C. area. That area. She was great. She was and still is a great athlete in her own right. She was a varsity cheerleader at Calvin Coolidge High School in Washington. She's a great tennis player and works out and is in great shape and still beautiful. So I was a real lucky guy. I don't know.
Now, what was her maiden name again?
Shreve, Shreev, is in Victor. E.
And where did her ancestors come from? What kind
I think
of
they're
name?
English stock. English stock. And
what did her dad do?
her father was a pastor, a Baptist pastor,
Yeah.
and then he was also an engineer. At one point in his career, I think we were already married. He left preaching, and although he was always a highly religious and good man, he left, I guess, to make more money or whatever. He had a degree, an engineering degree from Johns Hopkins University in Washington. So he went into engineering and was sent by his company from the Washington area to the California area. When I left flight school, I had expected, because I had previously asked for orders to any squadron or ship on the East Coast. Never wanted to go to California at all. But when I left flight school, the orders were to NAS Miramar, the VF-124 at NAS Miramar. So that put us in Southern California as well as her parents. And her father recently passed away, and her mother still lives in Corona, California.
Yeah. Is Barbara still Baptist then?
Barbara is still a Baptist, but she doesn't go to the Baptist church. She doesn't go to the Catholic church. She goes to a Christian church.
Mm-hmm. So tell me about mixed marriage. So my mom and dad, my mom was Catholic, my dad was not. Any problem with you guys?
No problems. Both of our children, our son Rick and our daughter Kelly, both baptized, confirmed Catholics. Rick was married in the Catholic Church, but unfortunately his marriage didn't last. Kelly was married in the Catholic Church. Kelly is very active at Holy Family in Pasadena, and she's the director of all kinds of boards. Before our first grandchild, Logan, was born 4 years ago, Kelly has her master's degree from Pepperdine University in psychology, and has her license as a MFT, marriage and family therapist, and was practicing marriage and family therapy for St. Anne's, which is I think a Catholic home for unwed mothers and so forth in LA County. And then when the children came, Kelly left practicing and is just been home with the kids, but she does much volunteer work at Holy Family in St. James is where Logan goes to school in Pasadena. St. James is Episcopal, but there was no Catholic preschool, so they sent Logan to St. James.
So when you started Florida, were you in pre-law? Is that what you were taking, or what?
I wanted the course of study that would get me to Vietnam as quickly as possible.
No, let me back up. Were you in ROTC in high school or
No,
college?
no,
or anything like that?
no. I at Florida in '66, in the just after January in '66, I was walking. I lived at the fraternity house, and I was walking back to the fraternity house for lunch, and I passed a table, and on one end of the table were the Marine recruiters for Marine aviation, and on the other end of the table was the Navy recruiters for Navy for naval aviation. And I walked past and I looked at the brochure sitting on the corner of the Marine. I was interested in it. It looked like something that I might be interested in doing. And I kind of kept moseying on down the other end of the table. And as I passed the Navy end of it, either the JG or lieutenant aviator at that end of it says, "Hey, you want to fly today in this airplane?" And it was a picture of a T-34, which I eventually soloed. Not that day, of course, but he said, "You want to fly this airplane this afternoon?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Okay, be at the airport at 1300, and we'll go fly, and I'll let you fly." So went out there. I got one of my fraternity brothers to drive me out there to the airport. It was just still at the Gainesville airport, and sure enough, he was there. Strapped me in the back seat and flew me around and flew over the campus. So we spotted our fraternity house, which was easy to spot. And he says, "Okay, you got it." So he let me. We were like, there was probably no minimum restrictions. Maybe we were 1,000 feet, 1,500 feet, something like that. And but you could clearly see it. And so he said, "Okay, you got it, fly it." So after that, came back and landed, and I was hooked. So I signed up. Okay, sign me up. And June in June of '66, 23rd class in 1966, which put you in June. My class was class 23, June '66. I started the first half of the OCS training for aviation cadets. And then went back to school, finished that year, and then finished the second half in '67. So when I graduated in March of '68, I'd already finished the two halves of the OCS training, so I was commissioned an ensign by a captain up at NAS Jacksonville, and then Barbara and I drove from NAS Jacksonville that day to Pensacola.
Now, you're in. So did you go 4 years to Florida?
I went 2 years to a junior college in Ocala called Central Florida. It's now a 4-year college, I think, called College of Central Florida. But in those years, it was called Central Florida CFJC. Central Florida Junior College.
Is that the Golden Knights? Is that?
No, we were called the Rebels.
Oh.
Golden Knights, I think, are University of South Florida.
No, they're the
Bulls. They're the
yeah.
Bulls. Maybe
But
that's
Central
Tampa.
Florida. The Notre Dame guy that from Georgia Tech years ago that he had fudged on something so he didn't get the job. I think he's at Central Florida.
Could be.
The university.
Yeah. Well, in those years, we didn't have a University of Central Florida. We didn't have. You had University of Miami. You had Florida State University. You had University of Florida, which was the main one, and then I think you had University of Tampa, and maybe you had Stetson, because Stetson was where my brother Steve went to law school. So, but Steve also graduated from University of Florida, where most of the people in my family have graduated.
So you were 2 years at Florida then?
2 years at CFJC, only a year and a half, because once I got into the once I had gotten into the program, well, I was trying to get.
Where the recruiter was that at the JC? Or?
There was a recruiter at the JC, but I didn't sign up until I actually got to fly the airplane at Florida.
So you was at Florida. That's what I was getting at. And what fraternity was that you were in?
I was in Kappa Alpha Order, which is it's all over the country. Even we have a chapter at Berkeley, but it's mostly a Southern fraternity. Robert E. Lee is our honorary founder and stuff like that. So, Kappa Alpha, and that's my fraternity ring. And interesting story. I don't know if you want me to deviate.
Sure, go ahead.
My little brother Ken was the Marine infantryman, 19 years old, wounded badly in November of '69. My wife Barbara sent me the telegram, said he's badly wounded, see if you can get to him. I was on the carrier, the Oriskany at the time, and we just settled down from finishing the combat operations on the flight deck, and I had a solo room because my roommate was not there. And in those days, we didn't have a door we had a curtain, just a curtain that hung down. And the telephone rings in the middle of the night, and I pick it up, and he said, Lieutenant, I was JG, Lieutenant Ryder, this is the comm room, we have a telegram for you. And so that, if you ever have had, it's pretty scary, So I said, well, who's it from? And he said, it's from your wife. I said, okay, read it. And so she then told me about my brother Ken badly shot up and try and get to him if you could. And I said, okay, could you get me the telegram down here? So he got it sent down to me. And I went to the skipper's room, woke him up, and said, Skipper, Ray Donnelly, said, Skipper, got this telegram. Can we do anything? He said, Red, get in the back of the next airplane that you can get on in the next launch, which was due in a few hours, and we'll give you basket leave, get to see your brother, get back whenever you can. And so I think I got in the back of a COD, a C-1, or maybe something else, I forget what, but bounced around that area for about a day or so, and wound up the early, I guess that morning, or maybe the morning of the next day, wound up at NAS at Sugi. I'm getting to the point of the ring. Wound up at NAS at Sugi, which is Tokyo. And Tokyo is about 100 miles north of Yokosuka. Yokosuka is where the Naval Marine Hospital is, 5 stories high. So I get off the plane, get a cab to the train station. Of course, the trains weren't running at that time, so I lay down on the sidewalk with this jacket as my pillow, and I'm laying they're just waiting for the trains to start running at 0600 or whenever, and the shore patrol guys come by, and he says, Lieutenant, you can't do that, so you're not gonna be able to sleep here on the sidewalk, we can't let you do that. So I said, okay, what do you suggest? He said, well, I suggest you go over to a place I think it was just outside of Iniesatsugi, like not a club or not a place to drink or anything like that, just like a USO, something like that. So I went there and came back shortly before the train started running, and got the train, and the trains were bullet trains that went 100 miles an hour plus for about like 200 yards, and then they screeched to a halt and do it again. And the thing was, I was like the first guy on. Now I'm in khaki cottons like this, with these flight boots on, with this jacket, with a khaki shirt with ribbons and my JG bars, and I'm wearing this this cap. It wasn't a lieutenant at the time. This is the cap that I was wearing. We call it a piss cutter. Was actually called a fore and aft cap, for technical purposes. So I was wearing that, and then and so I'm the first person on the bullet train heading south to Yokosuka. Well, every time it stops, maybe 200 little Japanese elementary age school kids in uniforms, black and white uniforms, get on. And so it stops like every few hundred yards. We haven't gone a mile, and now you're jammed in there. It's just like, it was all great. No, there was no real problems, except I felt like I was getting looked at by some of the older Japanese because I was in uniform, and essentially was in the uniform that I had worn on the flight deck. I didn't, the skipper said get on the first plane. There was a time thing. I went back, put my stuff on, grabbed my wallet, went up to the flight deck and got gone. So I was essentially not in my full dress uniforms. So that's how I was, and the shore patrol said, Lieutenant, can't let you do that. So went to the USO. So in the train. So finally the train stops at Yokosuka, and I get off. And as I recall, the train station, like the platform, was easy walking distance to the Naval Hospital, a few hundred yards. The Naval Hospital is 5 stories high. Am I using up all your time here? Okay, I don't know. In every wing, on every floor of that hospital, there's nothing but jam-packed, wounded, shot up, burned up Marines. On gurneys, in the hallways, in every wing, for 5 stories high. And so I talked to somebody downstairs and got an idea that my brother was up on one of the higher levels. So I got up to the level, and sure enough went to the ward where my brother was. Of course, couldn't see him; it was jam packed, and there were guys out in the hall on gurneys and everything. So I went in to where all the nurses and doctors were, and I kid you not, it was like you couldn't. I mean, it was just total chaos in there. Nurses running around with clipboards, doctors running around looking at clipboards, talking, giving orders left and right. So finally, I the guy with the eagles on his collars. So I walked up and I said, Captain, I'm Lieutenant J.G. Ryder, Richard Ryder. I believe that my younger brother, Kenneth Ryder, is on this ward, and before I go down to see him, if I can, I'd like to know what his condition is. And so it was like magic. The clipboard was put in his hand like magic, and the place went quiet. You could hear a pin drop, and nobody was moving around. He looked at it. He says, "Well, I think we're going to take his arm off," and he gave the clipboard back to the nurse, you know, and so I almost fell over. You know, I said, Captain, I've got to call our mother in 10 minutes, and I can't tell her that. And so I went quiet again. Clipboard went back to the captain again. And the captain said, all right, Lieutenant, here's the deal. If he doesn't infect within 3 days, we'll sew him up and ship him home. War's over for him. Okay. But if it infects and we can't clear up the infection, then we may have to take the arm off, which is a heck of a lot better from the way that I originally got the word. So I accepted that and went down to see my little brother, whose right arm is almost all shot off, and when he saw me, he was obviously amazed to see me, you know, because, you know, as far as he knew, we were up in the Gulf of Tonkin somewhere, and so what do you think the first thing I do when I go see my little brother? Grab him and hug him and take a hold of his right arm, which is just hanging on by a couple of threads of muscles. And but my brother's a Marine, you know, he never complained, and something he did when he was a little kid, he chewed a sheet when he was in pain or anything. He would chew a sheet and not get a lot of pain pills and stuff like that. There were many guys on the ward that were taking a lot of drugs and so forth, and they had their own situations. But my little brother, I distinctly remember, was just like he was when he was a little kid, was chewing on his sheet because he was in great pain. So anyway, we got a phone, and there was no room at the BOQ, so I asked the nurses if I could just stay there with him until a room opened up, if it did, at the BOQ, or I had to go back. And they said sure. So a couple of the nurses brought a couch where you could lay down on and sleep if you had to. So I just stayed there, and we called our mother, and you know, reassured her, and so then he didn't infect, and they did ship him home and sent him to NAS Jacksonville, and my mother was knocking on the gate at NAS Jacksonville every day for about the next 2 months to go in and visit him there. So for Kenny, you know, the war worked out well, not well. I mean, he came home from the war alive, I'll say that. But he doesn't complain. He's not a complainer to this day, and he's a hero. He and the other 51,000 that didn't make it back, and the other guys like him, they're the heroes, you know, of the conflict.
And what about your ring?
Oh, getting back to the ring. So anyway, so now I've stayed with Kenny for a few days, and I'm essentially out of money. I had the money that I had in my wallet when I left the ship, and I sent my clothes to the laundry, and I bought some civvy shirt and a pair of slacks just to wear around while my stuff was getting worse. And you got to pay for your own meals and stuff like that. So I'm essentially out of money. So I got to get back to the ship. The ship is now in Sasebo, and I'm up in Yokosuka, like 500 or 600 miles difference between the two places. So I go to NAS Atsugi, Tokyo there, get back up there, and I wait in the tower for something that's flying south that I can get in the back of. So, okay, Lieutenant, here's a COD, a C-1 mail plane, and you can fly in the back with the mail, and it's going south. We don't know how far south it's going, but it's going south, and that's the best we can do. So, and I had to, you know, get back to the ship, because the ship was in Sasebo, but was not going to be in Sasebo that long. Would be turning around and going back to Yankee Station, and it would be more difficult to hook up. It would be better to hook up while it was in port. So I'm in the back of the C-1 with the mail, and we put down at a Marine Corps air station called Iwakuni Marine Corps Air Station, and so I get off. It's nothing but a big field. It's maybe got 500 dilapidated Japanese World War II airplanes scattered all over the field, and a tower, and a couple Quonset huts, one of which was the officers' club, so-called. And so I go over to the officers' club. It's like just before dinner time, and white chalk. There's a blackboard and there's white chalk. Steak night, $3. I had $3 in my wallet. So I said, what else? So I fork over my $3 for steak night, and their officers' club was picnic tables, just like no chairs or anything, just picnic. It was clean. It was really nice, great food, good steak. So I'm at the table, and I'm thinking, okay, now you're out of money. This plane is not going south. How are you going to get from Iwakuni to Sasebo for 300 or 400 miles? So I'm sitting. This I kid you not. I'm sitting next to a Marine captain, aviator, and I happen to see that he's got a class ring on the same figure. I happen to see the letters in the middle of it. His stone was ruby or red or something. I happen to see that the letters are K.A. And I'm saved. Because I was thinking I'd just borrow $20 from him and take a train down there, and I'm saved. I could get down there. So I talked to, we shoot some mystics. If fraternities have these signs, mystics and words and stuff like that. So we exchanged mystics. So he knew I was a KA and I knew he was a KA, and so then I tell him my problem. I'm leading up to. We talked about Florida of Alabama. Oh, he was from Alabama. We talked about Florida, Alabama football and stuff like that. So now I'm gonna tap him for the $20, and he says, you don't need $20. He said, be at the flight line tomorrow morning 0600 and I'll fly you there. He was a helo driver, and he was a pilot of H-34s, which looks like a guppy, got a big round nose on it, and used for combat for medevacs and things like that. But so I said, sure. So 0600 or before, I'm at the flight line just waiting around, He comes out, does his walk around. Okay, let's go. And so it was just me and Samael and the co-pilot, as I remember. His mission was to drop some mail or supplies or something at an Air Force base about halfway to Sasebo, called Itazuki, U.S. Air Force Base Itazuki. And so we landed at Itazuki. He kicks the mail out, or maybe the crew, whatever. Somebody kicks the mail out, and we take off. So now we're heading south to Sasebo, and before long, we see the carrier on the quay wall, which means that it's tied up to the next to the walls. I recall it was pointed. We were headed south, so it would have been pointed west. And so the officer's brow is the forward brow. The enlisted guy's brow is the back brow. That's two ways to get aboard the carrier, and the quarter deck is at the forward brow. So the captain, and I don't recall his name even in the state. The captain comes around, and unannounced to anybody, comes around, makes one pass around the Oriskany, and comes and then puts down a beam a couple hundred yards from the forward brow, the quarter deck, and I just hop off in this jacket. I salute him, he salutes me, and he's gone. He's heading back north. And I said, man, you lucked out. And so, I kid you not, I look up at the quarter deck, and what do you think I see? I see two sets of binoculars looking at me. One's the OD, and one's the captain. the OD had seen the H-34 make a pass around the ship, and he didn't know what it was. He hadn't been informed that there was any visitors or anything. So he prudently notified the captain, whose quarters are 10 decks above the quarterdeck. So the captain immediately comes down to the quarterdeck, and he's expecting to see a big shot come up the prow, and he sees me in this jacket, JG, come up, and I snapped to attention. I saluted him, and he shook his head and laughed. He said, "How did you do that?" And then he just turned around, and the captain has an elevator up to his. The rest of us have to go up ladders, so he took his elevator up, and the last thing he said was, "Get a haircut." And then so man, I really lucked out, as far as getting back to the ship.
So let's go back. So you're heading down to Pensacola, you and Barbara. So let's pick it up from there.
We're actually heading from Jax, NAS Jax, to NAS Pensacola, which is like due west, 270 probably, something like that. And I'm from Florida. I've been all over Florida. Barbara is a transplant, but she's a Southern girl and everything, so she's unflappable. And we're driving the Corvette. So what else? So we get into Pensacola, and of course we don't have any place to stay or anything like that. We get in like on a Sunday or something like that. And I was able to acquire the Corvette as a new car off the showroom floor in Philadelphia. My father knew the owner for $3,500 cash for a brand new Corvette in '66, and I had some cash as a result of a lawsuit that was settled, and my father and mother put the proceeds in a bank account for me when I turned 21, and I happened to be 21 in '66. So I paid $3,500 cash for this brand new Corvette, so I had that. And when we got to Pensacola, I had $9,000 left over, and that was the end of the story. So Barbara and I were wondering what we were going to do. And the first guy that we talked to owns a mobile home lot, and so we ended up buying a mobile home for $9,000, which turned out to be a great investment. We kept it 5 or 6 years, hauled it cross country a couple times, and ended up selling it to an officer for a lot he had down in Mexico somewhere for $6,000, and I kept the furniture out of it. So I bought it for $9,000, sold it for $6,000, kept it for 2 or 3 years, had our son while we were in the mobile home, and so it was a good investment. But we moved the mobile home from we were first just outside of VT1 was at NAS Softly Field. Softly is primary flight, and I had already been through pre-flight in the summers. So once I got there, my orders were to VT1 Softly for pre-flight, and for pre-flight, and where you solo. So there was a mobile home park just east of Softly. So we set up in the mobile home park. Everybody in the park is a flight student, so we had a lot of camaraderie there, and went through VT1 pretty easily, soloed the T-34, and then got orders to T-28s, which is a different breed of cat, at VT3 at Whiting Field, and much more difficult plane to fly, especially for me. Was a more difficult plane to fly. So the Navy, after months at VT3, decided I would be better in the back seat than in the front seat, and so I got orders to VT10 to get into the RIO, Radar Intercept Officer program. And the Admiral told me, when they wash you out of pilot training, especially after the length of time I had in pilot training, you go to see the admiral. And the admiral is the head of the naval flight training in Pensacola, and he meets with you personally, one-on-one. And he's a really nice guy. I can't remember his name, but a very, very nice guy. And he said, look, you want to fly, we understand that, you know, just do a tour or two as a Rio, and then chances are you can get back into pilot training. So it sounded good at the time. So I went into VT-10 and essentially completed Rio training, but at the very end of it, decided I didn't want to go to the fleet as a Rio, just send me to the fleet as a maintenance officer. And that was fine. The next day I had orders to VF 124 for RAG, for the RAG training, to be a month later to be out at in the North Gulf of Tonkin on the Oriskany in VF 191, which was fine. You know, I wanted to fly, didn't want to really sit in the back seat of somebody else's airplane. Don't know if that was the right decision. Have questioned it over the years, but you know, I'm here, fortunately, and so I really can't argue with that.
So what? You know, I got a little bit more time to check before I change. So what was your job aboard the Oriskany then?
I was in the squadron. I was the ordnance officer, and I also was I served as squadron duty, SDO, squadron duty officer. In other words, the skipper, Ray Donnelly, looked at my jacket and seen what I had done and knew that I had put in a lot of time in flight school, and knew that I was probably capable of sitting at the desk and fielding calls in the ready room. So my primary job was ordnance officer, where I was responsible. We had, I think, Sparrow missiles, which is a homing missile, and we had Sidewinders, which is a heat-seeking missile, and we had guns. So those were my three areas in the F-8. And those were my duties on.
Did you lose any of them while you were out there on the Oriskany?
Yeah, we had at least, as I recall, one airstrike, ramp strike. I was in the ready room watching the Platt. We have a Platt down below, I think. A Platt is a pilot's landing and teaching device. It's a television screen which in the ready room, it's set up in the ready room. The pilots and aircrew can actually see the planes coming aboard and can watch the approaches and how the other pilots put the ship aboard. And it's a training device called a Platt. And I was watching the Platt, and one of our, this is an interesting, I guess, one of our officers, pilots, stalled the airplane, got in. The back of the carrier is called the ramp, and it's like 10 feet of the most solid steel known to man. It's like impenetrable. And the captain wants it impenetrable because the captain of the ship wants you to run into the ramp if you can't get aboard, rather than run into his ship and the rest of the airplanes. So this pilot came in his approach in the groove is the last 12 seconds before you grab a wire. And he got high in the groove, and he got stalled, and he slid into the ramp. And when he did that, the ramp broke his airplane. This is an angled deck. It's 10 degrees off the straight deck of the ship. The IRC, or base recovery course, is the straight line of the ship. The angled deck is 10 degrees off of the base recovery course, which is the straight line of the ship. He caught the ramp, broke his ship, his F-8 in half, and it rolled down around the angled deck, and he punched out. And we're in heavy seas, North Gulf of Tonkin. I don't remember if there was a horizon out there. It was difficult circumstances. We have 2 destroyers called plane guards in our wake about 1,000 yards. We have a helicopter up there, a plane guard helicopter. And somehow, miraculously, they picked this pilot out of the water and brought him back to the ready room in a few minutes. Well, I was the ordnance officer, and one of my duties was to keep track of all the sidearms that the pilots used on their missions. And so the pilot comes back into the ready room, and one of the first things, now his F-8 is at the bottom of the Gulf of Tonkin, and this captain says, "Where's your 38? Where's your sidearm?" Gus, and he looks down, he says, "Skipper, must have come out in the ejection, I don't know." And so he turns to me, Skipper turns to me, he says, "Red, I want you to have a report ready for me tomorrow morning on that sidearm." It was a 38 5-inch barrel with 5 rounds of real bullets and 1 round of flares. So you have a flare round and 5 rounds of HE rounds. And so, and the skipper says, he wasn't kidding. I'm not sure if he was kidding or not, but I took it seriously, because my job was, we had a safe where the pilots put the weapons in the safe, and I locked it up. I had to unlock it. I had to do inventory on all the weapons. So it turned out to be a joke, in the group.
Yeah, I gotta change tapes now. How are we doing?
But a guy like me, you get me started,
Well, that's good.
I talk for a living, so.
How about some water? Thanks. Don, some water? Do you need to take a break, Don?
A little bit, I'm okay.
You sure? Okay. There you go. Thank you. And Don, by the way, Don, you're welcome to join in or ask questions.
I don't want to disrupt your flow.
No. Well,
Right now, just a couple points for the uninitiated.
Yeah.
You're talking about VT and about V this and V that, and what does the V stand for?
V means fixed wing, V is fixed wing, T is training, F is fighters, A is attack. So if you're in a VA squadron, you're a fixed wing attack squadron. Fixed wing as opposed to helicopter.
Okay.
VT is a training squadron, so VT 7 or 8 is where you learn to come aboard the carriers.
All right. And one of the other questions, incidentally, you addressed all us. During your operations on the ship,
Yes,
the ones that you have now.
Absolutely.
Okay.
These, I was issued these at NES Kingsville in Texas when I was flying in the back of F9. F9 with tip tanks, and the Cougar was a vertical wing F9. They were single seat pilot trainings in the fleet in Korea, but after Korea they put a back seat in them to train back seaters in a fleet fighter jet. So when I was in Rio training, part of our training where I got these boots, maybe this watch, no, not the watch. The boots was VT, I think it was 23, VT 23 down in Kingsville, Texas, and warned them in the back of F4s when I used to do a Rio in simulated air combat maneuvers off the coast of San Diego in F4s. Had these boots on, had this jacket on if it was cold.
They just caught my interest because from appearance they aren't that different than what I wore in the infantry, but I know they must be.
They're steel-toed. Did you have steel toes in there?
No.
The reason that the steel toes are important is because working around the airplane, especially if you're on the flight deck at night, there's so much activity going on there. If you're not careful, it's possible for you to stick your toe under the tire of one of these airplanes that is taxiing around, which actually happened to, I was flying in the back of a Phantom. We were doing air combat maneuvering at NAS Miramar when I was in VF 301, and we did what's known as a hot turn. A hot turn is where you finish the first mission, you come back and you refuel only. You never shut down the engine. It's a hot turn. So you refuel the engine, then you launch again and go back on another mission. So we were doing a hot turn, and one of the ground crew guys at night in the fueling pits got his toe under, I think, our starboard main mount, and our pilot, who was a terrific pilot, a wonderful pilot, he didn't know, of course. He taxied the plane slightly forward, and the guy had his toe under the wheel, and the wheel ran over his toe. But because he had steel toe boots on, he didn't lose the front part of his foot. I mean, he was on crutches for a month or two, and his toes were all black and blue, but didn't lose them, and it was a result of having steel toe boots.
Well, very fortunate. One more, if I might. We're an air museum, as you so well know, and you made mention in flying at times of staying off the pedals and staying off the stick.
Right.
And under what circumstances would you do that?
Well, not being ever being a designated naval aviator, I know from my own flight experience and hearing the naval aviators talk. For example, if you're in a vertical climb, a straight vertical climb in an F4, and you get to the max altitude that you're going to get at the top of your climb, the airplane is designed that in such a fashion, if you stay off the rudder pedals, if you're not on the rudder pedals at all, and your stick is completely neutral, the nose of the airplane will fall through, and you will just fall through, and you'll be able to pick up airspeed and get back to flying status. Whereas if you're on the stick or on the rudder pedals, as I'm told by those who do this, you will induce a spin when instead of the nose dropping straight through and then being able to regain airspin, you'll induce a spin, which under some circumstances you can recover from if you have airspeed and altitude being the key. If you have altitude, you can recover from a spin unless it's a flat spin. If it's a flat spin, the airplane is already stalled, and you can't recover from a flat spin.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm told by those guys who fly the.
So what was Barbara doing back here I assume she's back here in the States when you were over there?
Our mobile home was parked in Oceanside at a mobile home park. Was mainly inhabited by other, mostly Marines at Oceanside at Camp Pendleton, but a few Navy types by me. And Barbara's a 23-year-old, beautiful young mother, and our son Rick turned 1 when I was on my tour, my first tour. So she's a young mother, and she's got a teaching degree, and she just did a spectacular, outstanding job. I mean, she
stayed at home with.
She stayed at home in the mobile home with Rick, and had a two-wheel bike. I mean, a two-seater bike, and would drive Rick around on the bike, and once in a while did some substitute teaching. And a lady next door neighbor whose son unfortunately was a Marine and was killed in Vietnam. She got close to Barbara, and so they made it. The lady, can't remember her name. I can see her face, but I can't remember her right name. She used to hoist her flag every morning in front of her mobile home, and she took care of Rick and gave Barbara a little time off so she could go do a little shopping or when
Now,
she
did you say Barbara's parents were out here in California then?
I don't
or
know if
not?
they were out there in '69. I'm not sure when he
When they
came out.
Okay.
But in '69, she was on her own. She was just on her own.
And so how long was that first tour then?
I think we went out in, well, I reported the ship. The ship had already been out. I reported to the ship, I think it was July of '69, and I think we came back in November or December of '69. So that tour was 5 months maybe.
Okay.
Then the next tour, that was the VF-191. Then the next tour, I had broken service. I was offered an early out. I had a couple of years to go, and I wanted to, I really wanted to teach school at that point in time. So I took the early out, and Barbara and I and Rick went in our mobile home back to Ocala, Florida, my hometown, and I got a job teaching at my old high school. And
So you had graduated from Florida,
from University of Florida, yeah.
the University of Florida, I mean, yeah, with
Yeah.
a teaching degree?
Yeah, with a teaching degree, because that was the quickest pipeline to get to the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
That was the, that I finished college in 3.5 years.
Hmm.
I finished Central Florida Junior College in a 1.5 or 1 3/4 years, and I finished the University of Florida 2 years in about 1.5 years. So I started college in September of '64, and I finished in March of '68. And I did that expressly for the purpose of getting to the war before it was over.
And the teaching, well, let's back up. So why were you so, was it because your brother was over there, or why did you
My
go?
brother joined, I think, because I joined.
Oh, okay.
And my brother was still in high school when I started my training. I think he was not even graduated from high school yet, and my brother is, whereas my older brother Steve was not very outdoors. He was more a kid raised in the city, and I was somewhere in between that. My little brother Ken was totally raised on the farm and in the outdoors, so he was totally of that mindset. And our family was patriotic from the standpoint that my father was a police officer and his father was a police officer. My father did not serve in the military on active duty, but we were still a pretty patriotic family, so that was the reason. And I was of the mindset that I just wanted to
And
wear
Bar-
that good-looking Navy choker uniform and get a few medals and stuff.
Barbara was pretty much on board with all this?
Well, Barbara was totally letting me make the decision in those years. It's changed in recent years, gladly. But in those years, she was a devoted. When Rick arrived, I was still in flight school. She was more concerned with getting Rick raised, and basically on her own. We didn't have. My mother still had the farm and my sister to account for and take care of. So my mother was not able to help out much, and Barbara's mother also had her younger brother, so and they had their lives going on. So Barbara was on her own, but Barbara is totally 100% able to take care of it.
So what were you teaching?
I taught for only one semester, less than one semester. The first semester, before I went back in '70, I guess, I taught history, 11th grade history, in the same classroom that I took 11th grade history, and with the same faculty that I had when I was a senior in high school. And they all knew me, as what the wildcat that I was in in high school, you know. And so anyway, I stayed in the reserves the whole time though, and I would drill at NAS Jacksonville. I was in a VP squadron. We flew P3s, and I was assistant maintenance officer for the squadron. And one day during a drill up there, a communication came down from SecNav. The war had picked up, and they needed officers to go back that had taken early outs. So I went home and I said, you know, to Barbara, you know, hey, I can go back in the Navy. You know, teaching school was okay, but you know, not great. You know, and so Barbara said, well, why do you do whatever you want to do? So I said, okay, let's go back in the Navy. And so I put in and then was recalled because Skipper Donnelly had given me such a good write-up, good evaluation when I left active duty that I was recalled, but just based on the strength of that, you know. And then I was ordered to report to Kittyhawk, and Kittyhawk was the flagship of CDF 77 at the time, and that would have been in April of '71.
And where was it based then, or was it over there?
Kittyhawk was based in Coronado, but Kittyhawk was in the Gulf of Tonkin when I reported aboard.
Okay.
So what we did, I think we had sold our mobile home when we left Oceanside, and so we moved to Coronado and rented a house, and then
You remember the street?
Coronado Avenue, yeah, beautiful street right next to the base.
Yeah.
And I reported to one of the Air Force bases that were ferrying people to Vietnam in those days. So I caught a plane in April something of what might have been the last part of March, because the interesting factor was my date of rank for lieutenant is April the 1st. So I reported aboard Kittyhawk as a JG, and I think it was April 1st, and I get down in the stateroom and get a call from the personnel officer, and he says, Captain Oberg wants you to report to the bridge right away. Really? You know, what for? What for? The personnel officer was a warrant officer, you know, nice fellow, but a warrant officer. So I felt a little more at ease. I said, yeah, what for? Why? And he says, well, he wants to promote you. Your promotion to 03 lieutenant has come in. So he's on the bridge. So I go up there. Of course, I had some bars because I knew I was going to get promoted sooner or later. And so went up there, I changed my shirt and everything, went up there, and Captain Oberg, who later became Admiral Oberg, pinned my bars on and had some pictures taken, you know, and thereafter treated me like one of his sons. He was such a great guy, O.B. Oberg, just a wonderful guy. He was promoted to Admiral while we were deployed. And so they sent him to MAC-V and replaced him with the captain who was the CEO of the ship during the mutiny. And O.B. Oberg was such a wonderful commanding officer, best commanding officer. Well, I can't say that. He was as good as Ray Donnelly, and Ray Donnelly and O.B. Oberg were the finest officers that I can recall ever meeting in my time in the service. I served 12 years, active duty and reserves, and they were fine officers. So Captain Oberg pinned my bars on and invited me to think. I guess they were shorthanded for bridge for watchtenders on the bridge, and somehow I got the word that I should probably try and check out standing watches on the bridge. My duties were on the flight deck, where I was in charge of all the yellow gear on the ship was my responsibility, except for Tilly. Tilly is the crane, where if you were lifting a aircraft up out of the water, you would crane it up, and we call that device Tilly, a great big crane. Tilly had its own crew and its own maintenance. But all the other yellow gear, tractors, forklifts, everything else belonged to me, were my responsibility in the AIMD, Aircraft Intermediate Maintenance Department. I was in charge of all the yellow gear. It's a huge job. And after a while, I got the word that Captain Oberg had said that I qualified as an officer of the deck in port, which is the first step to becoming an officer of the deck underway. And he said that I got the word that he suggested that I think about standing watches on the bridge so that one day I might be able to make it to officer of the deck on the Kittyhawk. And had Captain Oberg stayed as the CO, I'm virtually certain that I would have made it to OOD. I made it to JOOD on the Kittyhawk under the next captain, because the next captain was a lot tougher about qualifying, especially aviation designators, non-aviators, ground pounders, in other words, aviation ground pounders who were out of designation as deck officers. So I was still in an aviation designator, but standing watch as we used to call them black shoes, as a surface officer. And our captain was pretty reluctant to go that far, whereas I'm pretty sure that Captain Oberg would have done that. I was qualified JOOD, which is just under OOD underway, which on the Kittyhawk, the flagship of CDF 77, is not a small deal. So I started standing bridge watches and started out as the conning officer, which is the junior officer of the watch. You actually drive the ship. You tell the helmsman where to turn and how many RPMs to put in on the ship. You don't come up with that. Yeah, you can initiate those orders if you've got the con and you sense that there was a reason to. But mostly the OD or the captain, when the captain's on the bridge, the captain will give you those orders. But there were times when I made orders that for one reason or another the ship was veering off course, so you just tell the helmsman come right 20 degrees, or you set a different, if you need to speed up or slow down, you tell them to set a number of RPMs, things like that.
And you had F4s on
the Hawk. We had F4s and A7s for attack airplanes, A6s, A5s, A3s, but our fighters were F4s. And
the how many in the crew?
On the Phantom,
No. On the Kittyhawk itself.
there were 5,000 officers and men, essentially.
What about the Ariskami?
Essentially 5,000.
So were they basically the same size carrier?
No, Kittyhawk is larger. I think probably the air wing on the Kittyhawk is 100 planes, and the air wing fully loaded on the Ariskami is maybe 80 planes. And the difference is how much room you have on the hangar deck to store those airplanes. And typically what happens is, as you need more room to store airplanes on the hangar deck, you got to come up with the space somewhere. The only available space is forward of the hangar deck towards the forecastle down on the hangar deck level. And what are those spaces? Those are the berthing spaces for the enlisted guys. So as you expand the hangar deck, you're taking away berthing spaces, or you're making guys who have racks, three in a rack, to 4 in a rack. Maybe even they did that in the Army, or no. You have a guy 12 inches above your nose is your next rack, But both of those ships were just outstanding ships, warriors. The Oriskany was an outstanding ship.
What were your quarters like?
On the Oriskany, my quarters, a 2-man stateroom without a door, with a hanging curtain. You know, some of the other officers got doors apparently, but I didn't argue about it. I'm a JG, and my stateroom was right across the passageway from the wardroom, the officer's wardroom. As I recall, it was just across the passageway to
The wardroom is where you eat.
the wardroom was where the officers eat. There are two wardrooms on the carriers. The surface officer wardroom, the black shoe wardroom, is the main wardroom down on, it's usually on the not one deck below the flight deck, the two decks down. And the other wardroom is for the flight crews, which is up on the O3 level. The O3 level, as you go up a deck from the main deck, O1, O2, O3, up to O10 or up to O12, where the Admiral's bridge is, or down from the main deck, hangar deck. The main deck is on the hangar deck, where the mess crews also have, the enlisted guys have their mess decks, which is also on up forward near the forecastle, and the officers' wardroom is on the same deck, the second deck, just below the hangar deck, and it's also, but it's about midships. It was on the Oriskany and the Kittyhawk, and so my stateroom, two-man stateroom with the hanging curtain, was just like across the passageway, which is a hallway. Passageway is what we call it in the Navy. The passageway from the wardrobe. And so that was convenient for me, and I thought I had a great thing. And I had no roommate because the guy I relieved was the roommate, and as soon as I got aboard, he left. So now I'm in a two-man stateroom with a hanging curtain and no roommate. So I thought I was in the high grass.
What about on the Kittyhawk?
On the Hawk, we had a two-man stateroom, which was larger and a real door, but it was one deck down. It was like on the third deck down. And the thing that was scary about that was, if you ever lose lights below decks on a carrier, I don't care if you're on the surface, if you're below decks on the carrier and the lights go out and the emergency lights don't come on, you cannot see your hand in front of your face. You can't see your hand touching your nose. It is, and so our stateroom was down. You had to go down a ladder to get to it, where there was a head and some other staterooms down there. But I always thought, man, if the lights go out down here, you're in deep trouble. But of course, there are emergency lights supposedly that would click on to show you how to get out of the space. But part of my training as a deck officer on the Kittyhawk, when I was out of the squadron, and I did go through deck officer training, was firefighting below decks. And at Naval Station San Diego, there is a ship constructed underneath the parking lot. It's a full ship underneath the parking lot, which is used for firefighting school, which at the end of firefighting school, they send you down there with an OBA, a breathing device, and they fill the compartments with smoke down there. And it's very, very scary. It's designed to give you some type of experience of what it would be like in a fire below decks in combat. And it's pretty scary, very scary. But at least you have that training when you get to the fleet. So I was always, and we always have, we call it SA. I don't know what they call it in the Army, and I don't know what the staff types call it. SA is situational awareness, which means you have to know where you are at all times, and you have to this day, I go to a restaurant or a movie theater, I always look around and try and spot where I am and where I would go or where I would take the kids under whatever conditions it might be. So because of that, which is something you pick up in flight school, I knew that where I was in that stateroom was different from the one with the hanging cloth door up next to the wardroom, where it was wardroom was just one ladder, a ladder above the hangar deck level, which means once you hit the hangar deck level, you're outside, you know. So it was a lot more open. But Kittyhawk was a good ship, and when we were on station, we were always the flagship, and so we always had the admiral aboard. That means on the bridge, nobody came in front of us. Nobody diverted we diverted other people.
Who was the admiral at that time?
I could see his face, a tall, slender guy, just a nice guy.
Mm-hmm.
Can't remember his name, but his bridge is above. He's got a space above his bridge, which he typically in those days had a chase lounge up there, where when we weren't in flight operations and it was a sunny day, he would go up and read or whatever. He allowed anybody, enlisted guys, officers, anybody who wasn't on duty, to come up and spend time on up where he would be there in his chase lounge reading a book or something, or chatting with you, let you use his binoculars. This is the Admiral, CDF 77. He's in charge of Carrier Task Force 77, the attacking force against Hanoi Haiphong. And he's up there. I've got a picture, I think Doctor saw it. I'm looking out at his glasses, looking out, no shirt on, you know, like, and that's the way it was. You know, he was, you know, but when you were on duty, you know, you were supposed to be doing something. You made darn sure you never came in contact with him on duty. The only time you cut anywhere, as I recall, in the proximity of the Admiral, was up there when he was sunning himself. Or I don't want to say that, because that means that you think he was like into his own well-being. He was up there relaxing for a few minutes, but at the same time adding to the rapport and camaraderie with his men, the men that served underneath him. So
Now, we talked about Operation Linebacker, where they were mining the waterways and stuff like that. Other than that, what kind of missions were they flying when you were there?
Well, Operator Linebacker 1 and Linebacker 2, going back to the Oriskany in '69, the missions were attack missions, mostly, as I recall, in support of, I don't know, I'm sure there were missions against Haiphong, Hanoi, but I think many of the missions were down south, were below the DMZ. We were up, Yankee Station is like 17 degrees north, and Hanoi, Haiphong is like 20 degrees north. I think it's 103 east to 105 east. These are things that you learn on the bridge that you have to know. And so Yankee Station is more, the DMZ is at 17 degrees north, and I think Yankee Station is between 17 and 18 degrees north. But we operated more towards 20 degrees north when we were launching strikes against Hanoi Haiphong. The missions that we were operating in Linebacker 1 and Linebacker 2, Linebacker 1, they sent us out early to, I think we either started Linebacker 1, Kittyhawk, or we were right there at the start. And the whole purpose of Linebacker 1 was to cut off the communications supplies from China and Russia to North Vietnam through the seaways. And to do that, the strategy was to block access to the waterways, and the way to do that was to deposit, I believe I read somewhere that the Hawk and its air wing deposited 10,000 mines in the waterways around Haiphong Harbor. The mines were from 250-pound to 500-pound to 1,000-pound GP bombs with proximity fuses on them mostly. So if you came anywhere, if a ship came anywhere near it, it'd blow up and blow you out of the water. So very effective, and the missions to support that were missions to drop the mines, missions combat air patrol with the F-4s to make sure the perimeter around the CDF-77 was secured. We had our Phantoms up there, combat air patrol, and I'm sure some of our Phantoms went down south and were diverted by the Triple C something was the communications heart of the war in the north, and they controlled where all the airplanes, and they could divert 4 of our Phantoms down to somewhere below the DMZ or send our Phantoms downtown. When that means Hanoi. If you went downtown, you went to Hanoi.
Mm-hmm.
So, but CFC, Triple C something, were the designator of Command Communications Central. It was run by 7th Air Force. 7th Air Force controlled the skies, including the Navy types, I think.
Did you make any really close friends while you're out there? And have you kept in touch with them, if so?
Well, I kept, my closest friend is a maintenance officer who I met at VF-124, Dave Karpowicz. Dave was an ensign at the time. I was slightly ahead of him. I was a JG. Dave stayed in the nav and made it to rank of captain as a AIMD officer. He was in charge of AIMD at NAS Miramar in his career. He's done other things since then out of the nav. A fine fellow, lives in Missouri, and he's the oldest friend who I keep up with. We play golf once in a while. It's still read this, read that, and from those days. But other friends I've kept up not as much with. One of my close friends, a guy named Dennison Pike, was an A7 driver, and he was our first combat loss in the 72 cruise. I think he was shot down somewhere, flying an A7 somewhere. I don't think it was downtown. I think it was below the DMZ somewhere. But he was lost, and I had dinner with him as a hybrid black shoe, and in those days brown shoes. Brown shoe being aviation types, black shoe being surface types. Although Admiral Zumwalt turned us to all black shoes when he became CNO, but since I had experience in aviation and surface, I had friends in the 03 level, the upper wardroom where the air crews could eat in their flight suits. And I had friends where in the main wardroom where you had to be in uniform and spiffy, because the president of the surface wardroom was the XO of the ship who ate in the wardroom. And so if you couldn't go in the wardroom looking sloppy, you get yourself a Dutch. Whereas you could go in the 03 wardroom in flight suits or whatever you wanted to. But so I ate between both places, and I had dinner, I think at the 03 level that night with Denny Pike the night before his mission. A great guy. I don't know if I knew him in flight school, but probably I did, because he was a lieutenant, I was a lieutenant, and he he was just a good guy, had plans, and a handsome guy, and a good pilot, and his life stopped the next morning, and so he's on the wall. We visit the War Memorial in Washington, and Denny Pike's one of the names of the on the wall. And then so you think about those guys. I typically wear my U.S. flag and my Vietnam combat ribbon every day on shirts and suits when I go to court, when I don't go to court, and it's the way I look at it, it's the 51,000 guys and gals that didn't come back. You know, it's some way recognizing them when their young lives stopped at ages 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. You know, and I've been able to live another 40 or 50 years. So it's something, and it's just not me. I think anybody with that experience might do the same thing in a different way, not necessarily sporting a combat ribbon, but in some way.
So when did you come back from that tour then?
In the '72 tour, as soon as Linebacker 1 stopped, President Nixon stopped Linebacker 1 in like November of '72, and I had come back, I think on November 15th or 16th to take the LSAT, because by that time I had decided I was going to go to law school. So, and the ship was due to be relieved from the line and go back to the Philippines for rearming before another line period. So I was going to scoot home, take the LSAT, and come back. President Nixon stopped Linebacker 1 in the first part of November '72, and to give the North Vietnamese the chance to come to the bargaining table, because we wanted our POWs back. But they didn't work. But it worked from the standpoint that we had already deposited 10,000 mines. We had already cut off their communications shipping-wise. They were out of SAMs. Hanoi was as I have read, was the most heavily defended city in the world in those years, except in '72 they were out of SAMs. And so we still had our B-52s. So President Nixon started Linebacker 2. Kittyhawk wasn't the flagship of Linebacker 2 because Kittyhawk had left the line to go to the PI for rearming before it would come back and reestablish its position as the flag. So I think Ranger or Forrestal or Enterprise or Constellation, one of those boats was CDF 77 at that time. The Admiral transferred his flag. But so anyway, I came back to take the LSAT, and when I was due to report, I took about a week's leave or 10 days leave, and I went to NAS North Island to catch a flight back. They just said, we've been advised you're ordered to stand by, because the ship had was not going back to the line, was just returning to the States. And they said, you know, it's ridiculous to fly you over there to have you ride the ship back, so you just wait here for the ship. And but during that period of time, President Nixon started Linebacker 2, which was the B-52 strikes in Hanoi. Now they're out of SAMs, and so that's when the North Vietnamese agreed to give us back our POWs, because they knew they were dead meat. They knew they were vulnerable to our B-52 strikes without the SAMs. So we got back our POWs, and essentially that was the end of the air war in Vietnam for the Navy. We headed east, you know, and then the ship came back. I reported back aboard, and we took the ship up to Bremerton or somewhere around San Francisco area, I forget which, and I departed the ship and started law school the next day. You know, when
Where'd you start law school?
I started teaching school history for San Diego community colleges during the day, and at night I went to Western State University College of Law in San Diego, which at that time was and it's starting its second year. So I was in the second class of that school. We just skipped over it. It might be appropriate to, since it's a notable thing, and I've mentioned it to you, Doctor. In October of 1972, when we were launching combat strikes against Hanoi Haiphong from north of Yankee Station, so we were up around 20 degrees north. We were due to get relieved before the middle of November, but our relief, I think it was the Ranger or the Forrestal or one of the other ships, was sabotaged, and that meant that we were held over on the line for an extra line period. We had already served, Kittyhawk had already served 177 days, or at that time maybe 160 days on the line, and so we had our crew was anxious to get off the line and go home, and unfortunately race tensions boiled over, and history records that the only mutiny in a U.S. Navy warship during combat occurred on Kittyhawk on, I think it's October 12th of that week, because it started as a race riot, grew out of control. I think there were many injuries, 50 or 60 injuries. There were some seriously injured that were medevaced, and the mutiny went on for a number of days, and eventually dampened. And Kittyhawk never interrupted its combat operations. We never missed a strike. We never left. The flag never left us. We were, as I recall, launching day and night alpha strikes. An alpha strike is everything that you have that's available for the strike is in the strike. And so we were launching day and night alpha strikes even during the mutiny. And Captain told us, as I recall, didn't tell me personally, but got the word out that stand your watches on the bridge or wherever else you had watches and go to your workplace, but don't be roaming around the ship, because the ship in those days was a dangerous place. So we got back, the ship got back, we reported aboard, I took her north, and then left the ship in 73, in January 73, started law school, and a short while later I was recalled to active duty to be a witness at the court-martials, which were held at Naval Station San Diego. The reason being that as the division officer in the division that handled all the yellow gear, I had many 30 or 40 sailors that were alleged and accused to have participated in the mutiny at one level or another. And I was aboard during the mutiny. So I was called as a witness for the prosecution, but I told the prosecutor that I reviewed the records of all these sailors that I wrote. I gave them their most recent grades and write-ups myself, and I knew all these sailors personally from having been in combat with them for 9 months. And so I knew all these sailors personally by name, and told the prosecutor that as far as I was concerned, they were all top-notch sailors, and I had no information that any of them participated in any way in the mutiny. So I was not called as a witness for the prosecution. And as I read, or I have read, that none of the sailors in my division were convicted of any court-martial offenses. I think there were some sailors, not in my division, I don't believe, but were changed their plea from not guilty to guilty for NJP offenses. NJP is non-judicial punishment, which is like captain's mast. You lose your ice cream privileges for half a day or something like that. NJP, not court-martial offenses. I think there might have been some who changed their plea from innocent and took some NJP, but none of my sailors, as I recall. It's all part of the public record that you can read anywhere. And I don't know what happened to the rest of the crew, including the captain and the XO, who was also the rank of captain. I don't know what happened to their careers specifically.
Okay. So, were you still living on Coronado when you were going to law school?
For the first year, we had acquired a different residence. The Navy commander who owned the place that we rented on Coronado Avenue wanted his place back. And so one street over from Coronado Avenue is Balboa Avenue. So we rented a nice house on Balboa Avenue. And I stayed there until we bought our home in Del Mar. We moved from Coronado to Del Mar in 1974, and
was that in Del Mar Heights?
The Del Mar Heights, the little inexpensive in those days houses that have become 6- and 7-figure houses. Same house. We had a beautiful house.
What street was that on?
We were on. The name will come to me. It was a little side street, beautiful house. We backed up right to the Torrey Pines State Park extension, so there were no homes south of us or west of us, and we loved that house. We stayed there until 1980, and then Portofino was the name of that street, and we stayed there till 1980, and then I wanted to go back to Florida and practice law with my brother, who was a lawyer in Ocala. As a matter of fact, he was one of the leading lawyers in Ocala for a while, and so we went back to Florida, and unbeknownst to me, you'd think a naval officer would have more SA than this, but went back to Florida. I'm thinking that I'm a graduate of the University of Florida, born in Florida, all those Florida connections, that I could just sit for the Florida bar. Well, Western State University was non-accredited. It was accredited in the state of California at the time, but it was a nighttime law school. And I couldn't get back to the University of Florida. We were in San Diego. I was working and trying to go to nighttime law school. So I went and was enrolled and graduated from Western State University, passed the bar. And so when we went back to Florida, thinking that those Florida Supreme Court justices would surely let me sit for the bar, I had not been graduated 10 years. I graduated in 77, and we went back to Florida in 81 or 82. So I'd only been a California lawyer, for 5 years. And so they said, no dice, no can do. Our rules are you have to have been in practice for 10 years. I graduated from a accreditation by the Bar Association, the Maine Bar Association. And so we had a beautiful home on a golf course there, spent all the money that we made on the Del Mar house, acquired this beautiful home in Ocala on a nice country club where my folks lived on the other side of it, had to sell it, and drove back in towing a Mercedes-Benz with a German Shepherd dog and cat in the back of it, a Ryder rental truck with all of our belongings piled on that truck, even on the roof of that truck. Barbara and I drove that truck cross country back to California so I could start practicing law again.
With the kids too?
No, we sent the kids to the grandparents, to our grandparents,
Yeah.
ahead of time. What a momentous thing that was. Back to the DAVE. I don't know, are we still interested here?
Sure.
I thought this was interesting. I wrote it up and sent it to Reader's Digest, and they didn't print it. But in '69, I think it was '69, might have been '70. Barbara, I wanted to see Barbara badly, of course, and so I said, "Why don't you come over for one of the import periods, and we'll go to Hong Kong." And so it was all arranged. She would fly into Hong Kong, and then I would fly from Manila to Hong Kong, and we would stay at the Hong Kong Hilton for a week or however long we had, and I'd fly back to the ship and she'd fly back home, and Grandmom was taking care of the kids. So it was all set up, wonderful. And we're coming back to the PI, to Subic Bay. Well, QB Point is where the Kittyhawk and the other carriers hooked to the wall, the quay wall at Subic Bay, QB Point. So we're coming back, and lo and behold, about a day out of the PI, we hit probably the worst typhoon up to that time in the history of the PI area. It was, we were delayed one day out at sea because it was too dangerous to come into port. So now Barbara's in Hong Kong at the Hong Kong Hilton. I'm already delayed one day because of the typhoon. We only have 6 days to start with. So finally the ship, this is just phenomenal. The ship anchors, or not anchors, tied up to the side, and I'm the first guy down the brow, run to the tower, and I'm Lieutenant Ryder. I need air transportation to Manila right away. And then the first class petty officer behind the desk looked at me and said, "Lieutenant, there is no air transportation to Manila, and there is no surface transportation to Manila. We are completely isolated here." The whole country was underwater. They were burning oil barrels for heat. There was the whole, it was like Katrina in New Orleans, except I think worse than Katrina. And people were living in the street, mud streets and everything, in their villages. And I know this firsthand. Well, you say, how do you know this firsthand? So, Lieutenant, there's no air transportation, there's no surface transportation to Manila. No can help. So, but as I was leaving, the first class says, but if you want to get to Manila, Lieutenant, respectfully, you're going to have to walk. And he was serious. And so I said, how does that happen? And he said, maybe you could find a guide or somebody. Well, the wardroom in those days was staffed by Filipinos mainly, in that designator for their duties. So I went back to the wardroom and I asked around, is anybody from Manila here that's in Olongapo City, was the name of the little town outside of the base at Subic Bay. And it was if you ever heard of Tijuana, Olongapo City, and I used to stay in shore patrol watches as shore patrol officer, so I know firsthand. Olongapo City was a rough city. Just to digress a second, when I stood shore patrol watches, we had a first class and two other junior petty officers and me as the shore patrol officer. And when we would go around these clubs at night, the first class would say to me, "Lieutenant, stay out here, and if we need you inside, we'll come get you." Because he didn't want me going in there because You had Marines that are one day out of Vietnam, still had Vietnam under their nails. Who knows what weapons they had on them. Was really, if you ever saw the movie Good Morning Vietnam or one of those movies, those places were just like that. The dancing girls, the worst that you could think. So the first class would tell me, wait out here. There was a plank sidewalk of like 2x4 planks, not a concrete sidewalk, and they hang monkey meat on hangers, like you hang your shirt up on. They've got monkey meat cooking in the barrels that are lighted in the street. Monkey meat hanging from these barrels. So we come walking up there. Lieutenant, you stay out here, and we'll go in and check it out and call you if we need you. So that's okay with me, you know. So they go in. Nothing usually happens, but the shore patrol was a different experience. So anyway, I go to. I guess I was starting to talk about Olongapo City. It was a tough city, like in the neighborhood of any border town. It really can be a tough city. So Olongapo is divided from the base by a river we call the Perfume River. Perfume because it really stinks. It's the worst smell that you. And when you go back into the base and cross over the bridge, you've got all these young kids in the water there, and typically the sailors throw money to them. They dive for money in the Perfume River. So that's the setup. So I go back to the wardroom and I said, know anybody that can be a guide for me to Manila, to get my plane, to get to Hong Kong, where Barbara's already there. And this one guy, I says, yeah, but my brother lives in Olongapo, and he can take you, we're from Manila, he can take you to Manila. And I said, okay. So I had my orders. My orders were be back from, go to Manila, go to Hong Kong, come back, you know. And so other than that, how I got there was, I felt was up to me. So I go in town and introduce to this guy. Yeah, I can be your guide there for $20, which was a lot of money in those days, especially in their situation. I said, sure, okay. And so he says, let me grab my whatever from my drawer. And one of the things he grabs and put in his belt is a .38 revolver. He says, I said, why do you need that? And he said, there are robbers along the way. And I'm sure there were. So he tucks this thing in his belt. Now I've got like $1,000 cash in my pocket to go to Hong Kong. I'm not armed. But the only sensible thing, I'm wearing my uniform, my blouse with the boards and my ribbons and stuff, and my cover, not my piss cutter, the round hat, the garrison cover. So I'm in uniform, and so we start out. This guy, a nice guy, and he's doling out little bits of money for different things, drinks and cakes along the way. We start out. I'm on the hood of a tractor, just like the tractor I rode on the hood when I was a kid in Ocala. Same thing. It was probably a Massey Ferguson or a Ford or John Deere. I think it was a John Deere tractor because they're distinctive. And so I'm on the hood of this tractor, and the tractor's hauling a cart full of chickens and stuff and kids and stuff like that. I'm on the hood, and my guide is behind the driver, and we're bouncing away on this tractor. And we're going through these villas. The devastation is just unbelievable. Kid, it's just unbelievable. You wouldn't believe it. It was as bad as I said, Katrina, from what I saw in the newsreels. So we do this for hours. We walk. When the tractor had to turn off, we walked a while, picked up another ride, rode in the back of carts, walked for a while, and finally, it was night now, and we come to a lake. I don't remember the name of the lake. The only way across the lake and my guide is paying out like pesos or coin amounts for our passageway and everything, and I'm sitting there with $1,000 plus in my cash in my pocket. And the way to cross the lake is a bonga boat. A bonga boat is what they call these things that are like these narrow canoes that are like 40 feet long with sharp points on either end, a flashlight on the bow end, and a little half horsepower outboard on the back end, chugging along in the back end. And in the middle, 20 people sitting in this bonga boat. And there I am. I'm in the middle of the bonga boat. And to get across the lake took at least 2 or 3 hours. And I remember there was a horizon and a full moon, and I'm thinking, man, you are really exposed here. You're really compromised. The only smart thing was I had my uniform on. In those days, they respected that, and they probably still do. But other than that, wasn't smart at all. So I'm in the middle of the boat, and I said, man, they could dump you. You know, if they knew you had $1,000 cash in your pocket, you'd be history. So, but we eventually got to the other side. The boat beached, and we hopped off, and they had 30 or 40 jeepneys, which are World War II leftover Jeeps that they've converted into taxi cabs in the PI. And so we jumped into one, but the one we jumped into was not the first position. And they had, their rules was you couldn't jump in the middle because it was a money factor. So we jump in this one, and we start taking around to go around. The guy says, sure, it gets the pesos, and he's going to drive you regardless he's not in the first position. So he drives around, and what happens? What comes through the windshield? Monkey wrench. Because the guy in the front position, threw a wrench in this guy's position. So my guy grabbed my arm and said, let's get out of here. So we jump around, then we go to the first one, and hop in the first one, and then we go. And so then we get the guy's going to take us to Manila. It's maybe 25 or 30 miles, and the guy says, take me to blah blah blah, my cousin's house in blah blah blah, some private residence. And I leaned over and looked at the guy, and I said, you take me to the Manila Hilton, and you do it now. And so the guy took me to the Manila Hilton. They had armed guards in front of the Manila Hilton, and I was in uniform, and they saluted, and I said, I've got reservations here, and they let me in. And on the way to the car, I had a bunch of $1 bills, which I was feeding to my guide along the way for this, that, and the other thing. Maybe $10 in $1 bills. So I just kind of crunched them up, and I stuck them in his hand and said, there, thanks. So he was counting the ones as I scooted through the gate. And this guy was armed with a .38, And so I got aboard the plane either that night or the next morning. Got to Hong Kong, hooked up with my beautiful wife, spent 4 or 5 days, having a wonderful time, and then it was back to duty, But by the time I got back, there still was no air transportation, but surface transportation had resumed getting back to the base. So I rode in a back of a bus, one of the first buses that was going that route between Manila and Subic Bay, full of chickens and pigs and other people. But I arrived. So
when you were on the ship in the typhoon, what was that like?
it was tough. My first typhoon was on the Oriskany. As a officer in the air wing, the junior officers in the air wing are given a watch called the Aircraft Integrity Watch. If you ever have known anybody in the air wing, officer level, or in the surface level, they will tell you that the Aircraft Integrity Watch during a typhoon is probably the most dangerous, outside of being on the flight deck during flight operations, is probably the most dangerous thing that you're ever going to do. Where it is you're on the flight deck, The Aircraft Integrity Watch office is a little like this office, maybe not this big. And you go in there, there's a chart, and you go in there and you meet with the other enlisted watch standers. You have typically a first class and a second class and maybe a third class petty officers. And your job is to go around in good weather. Your job is to go around the flight deck and check the tie-down chains on all the airplanes. Some of the airplanes had up to 21 tie-down chains at various tie-down points on all the airplanes. They all had tie-down chains in some number or another. So in a nice day, on a nice evening, you just walk around, with your flashlight and you check around. That's cool. But in a typhoon where you've got waves that are breaking across over the bow, the flight deck is approximately 100 feet above the water line. So you've got waves that are breaking above the bow. And the small boys are going down like this, and you don't see them, the destroyers in our wake, you don't see them for 15 seconds. Then all of a sudden they come popping up like that. And the ship is rolling, pitching, up and down, and it's really difficult. You can't stay if you're in your bunk, you've got one arm or foot against the bulkhead, because otherwise you'll roll out, So, but where am I? I'm in the Aircraft Integrity Watch office on the flight deck. The watch stills go. Those planes were popping those chains like rubber bands. And your job was not to replace the chains, but to report. They had another poor crew that had to actually fix the chains. Your job was to report the aircraft's position that needed the chain so it didn't slide off the flight deck. And it was almost as bad as firefighting school. You could barely see your hand in front of your face. We got around. I was behind the first class. My hand was in the back of his belt, the first class. The other two kids were behind me, so I essentially was in the middle. The first class, with whatever light we had, is L-shaped flashlight. That's the only light we had. That was the only light in there. The ship is pitching around. There's no line. You're not on any lifeline. The water's running all over the flight decks. The ship's pitching around. Now that was a hairy watch. I kid you not. That was. I was so happy when that 4-hour watch, when we got relieved. All of us were like praying. And one of my friends, who was a Marine aviator, highly decorated, got 44 air medals, and you got 5 missions to get an air medal, 44 combat air medals, and so he was highly decorated. Many other decorations on top of that. He stood the Aircraft Integrity Watch during a typhoon on the East Coast one time, down around San Juan, Puerto Rico, and he said, "Man, I stood that and watched." I said, "But I just kept my people in the Aircraft Integrity Watch. I just kept us in the office for the whole watch. We never went out at all." And I was thinking, man, where was my head, And so that was that's how the typhoons are. That was on the Oriskany, which was smaller than the Hawk, and bounced around. But we also, I think it was on the Hawk, we had 2 other typhoons, or at least one other typhoon that were the one that I told you about trying to get to Hong Kong was there. So I guess we had 2 typhoons. Really rough stuff. And especially when you have to stand a watch up on the bridge, you don't get the captain's elevator up to the bridge just because there's a typhoon going out. The ladders are what civilians or army types might call stairs, but the ladders that are ladders, that's what we call them. They're not like a painter's ladder, but they're similar. And the way that you get to an upper level, topside, is you go up these ladders. Well, they're out in the wind typically. You're on to get to the bridge. you have to climb ladders. We call it the island. The superstructure, which contains the bridge and the CAG, Commander of the Air Group, where they watch all the launches and everything. That's on what we call, it's called the island. The Navy guys call it the island, but it's the superstructure of the ship on which the numbers of the ship are painted. Well, the only way you get to the bridge from the hangar deck level or from the flight deck level is you climb those ladders, which are outboard on the island. and it, you know, if you've got to get there and relieve that, typically you want to relieve your watch anywhere 15 minutes to no later than 5 minutes before you're supposed to assume your watch. You know, you got to get up there, you know, and whether the ship's pitching around or not, you know, so it's pretty, gets your attention, at least you pay attention to what you're doing.
So when you came back to San Diego, did you go back to San Diego when you came back to California? Or?
Which tour?
No. This is when what we were talking about before, when you had gone back to Ocala.
Yeah,
couldn't get.
That was in '69, and then by the first part of '70, let's say, must have been a year off, because I reported to the Kittyhawk in April of '71, and I was recalled to active duty maybe in January of '71. So I had done the first semester of school, September to December '70. I had been a school teacher in Ocala, and then we decided to go back in the NAV. And
Yeah,
so,
yeah, I know. But then you came back, you got your degree, and you went back to Florida to practice, but that didn't work out.
right,
And so you went back with the big U-Haul or the
Right.
trailer.
Right.
So where in California did you come back to? You had sold your place, you said, in Del Mar.
right. We didn't have any place, so we moved in with Barbara's parents in Corona, who graciously accepted us and our 2 kids at that time, with the trailer sitting outside their yard in the Mercedes and the dog and everything else. And I went into Riverside and rented a law office, and from a guy who he's now one of the heralded, he's not deceased, but he's one of the heralded lawyers in all of Riverside, Vince Minnelli or something like that. So he rented me an office in his building, and so I tried to practice there. It's hard to build a law practice from scratch, and but we survived. And then you know, I was hoping to do something else, and one of my friends from the Del Mar days. You saw the picture, I think, Doctor, in my office, of the Philly that we owned.
I was going to ask you about
Yeah.
it. Relate that little story to us.
The year my father and mother came out the year before he died, which was 1979, at age 67, and my father was quite a well-known and quite a guy who was well respected in that circuit, the racetrack circuit on the East Coast. And so he came out, and he realized that he wasn't probably going to make it, and they still had the farm at that time. And so he said, Ann, my mother, Ann, I want you to, Barbara and I took my mother and my father to the racetrack at Del Mar racetrack. And we had, like everybody else has, a deal where you pay for you can go up to like the VIP part of it, but anybody could do there. It's not like you're anything special. You just pay extra to go up there. And so we took my dad there, and my dad kind of looked around, you know, and didn't say anything. My father was so refined guy, you know. He was unflappable was my father, and so he told my mother when they were leaving. He said, Ann, I want you to send a filly out here next year. I want you to send a horse out here next year so Richard will get a parking space at the track. Because my father, the way they did it in the East Coast during his days, if you owned a horse on the track and were racing a horse on the track, you got a parking space designated to you. Well, it doesn't work. I don't think it certainly didn't work at Del Mar. The big trainers didn't even get parking spaces. So, but my mother honored his wish, and sent out a filly that we finished her training, and actually named her. She was out of a stud from Ocala named Lord Rabot, and my son Rick had a boa constrictor that he fooled around with, a little snake, named Rosie. So we named this filly Rosie Rabot. And so Rosie was a runner. She was a small filly, but she was quick and fast. And she went through training good. We got a trainer, a young fellow at the time named Carl Pugh, was a great trainer. Was a cowboy from Prescott, Arizona. Prescott, somebody say, but the rodeo people call it Prescott. But from Prescott, and was a good trainer. And he was our trainer of Rosie Rabot, and we raced her at Del Mar. And so she got in 2 races at Del Mar while my mother was here. My father was gone. My mother was here, and so my mother was in charge. My mother was the bankroll for the farm, for everything, And so we go to the track, and Rosie gets boxed in on her first 2 races. She's picked to win. She runs 4th her first 2 times out. And my mother says, "Oh, this filly's never going to win. I'm going back to Florida." So she drove herself back to Florida. As I was telling the doctor yesterday, or the day before, that leaves me in charge. Okay, so Rosie's in another race, and I go to the saddling area, and I say to Carl, Carl, our jockey that day was a bug boy. That means in the jargon of the racetrack, that's a boy who's never won a race in that state. He was from New York, and he was now riding in California, and he was a bug boy. But as a bug boy, you got a 5-pound weight allowance. So that meant if you were at the weight was 115 pounds, you could ride at 110 pounds if you could make that weight, which he could. So he has the mount, and we draw the #1 post position at Del Mar, right on the rail, good firm turf, and so it's not like a ditch or something that's going to slow you down. Good and firm right up to the rail. So we're in 10 or 12 horse field, and Rosie's got the #1 position. So in the saddling area, we're all decked out in our clothes, and our kids at that time were 5 years old, and our son was 7 or 8. He's now 42 or 43. So it was in 1980, I think. So I say to Carl, tell this boy to break her on top and keep her on top and run her out. Don't let her get back in the pack, because she won't make it. And so if she can't make it on top, then she can't make it. But break her on top and keep her there. So it was like a mile, or it was more than 6 furlongs. So I think it was a mile, and was not on the turf, was on the dirt. And so he breaks her on top just like he's told. He takes her to the front, and all the way around she's leading by 2 or 3 lengths. She's away. She's like, and we're like, oh man. So she makes the turn, headed for home, and gets to the eighth pole, which is eighth a mile away from the finish line. And this boy, I forget what his name is so excited about the possibility of winning his first race, he drops the reins, or lets the reins drop in his hands, which means the bit then drops in the horse's mouth. So Rosie, when the bit drops out, Rosie's never experienced that. She veers into the rail. She bounces off the rail. Well, then the boy was able to pick up the reins, and I showed Doctor Rosie wins by a head in that race where she was leading all the way around by more than a length and a half. She wins by a head. And Carl was like, if that kid cost us that race, I'm really going to be mad at him. But he didn't, he picked it up. So that was an interesting story. The next race, however, we raced Rosie at Hollywood Park, I think. And because the meet at Del Mar was closing down, and I think we went to Hollywood Park. and she got in a jam there, and fell down, and got a stress fracture. We didn't have to put her down, but we sent her back to the farm, and she had a few colts. The distinction about our farm was, as far as I know, and I think I know the real story, we never raised a horse off our farm that didn't break its maiden. And so this Rosie's colts, all of her colts, she probably had 2 or 3 colts, and they all won. They were all winners. So we had some good horses off the farm.
Now, is the farm still in your family?
We sold it out to a big outfit our farm was 350 acres, and the guy just west of us had 500 acres, and he wanted to buy our 350 acres so that he would own between the 2 state roads, he'd own 1,000 acres. So when my father was gone, my mother, of course, she couldn't handle the farm, and nobody was there except my sister to help her out. So she sold the farm, but bought a 20-acre place where she still kept a few mares of her choice in Anthony, but she sold the big farm. And
is your mom still alive?
we lost her in 2006 at age 93, and we lost my brother Steve in 2006 as well at age 62 or 63. He had complications with diabetes, but it was wonderful, the being around horses and raised on the farm was great for us. As far as kids went, I think it meant a lot to us. Gave us a solid platform to work from, I think.
And you were saying that because you're in Riverside working as a lawyer there, but you were thinking about doing something else, I think you were saying.
Oh yeah, we were thinking about. I came up with this great idea of going to Northern California, extreme Northern California, like up in as far, I don't know what it's called, but it's
Eureka.
Eureka. Okay, as far, for some reason, why would we? I'm from the South, not used to a lot of constant rain and that type of weather, but I came up with this thing. Oh, let's go to Eureka. We could start a practice up there. And Barbara has always been a wonderful wife, and she was saying, well, okay, if you think we can do it. So that was the plan, and I believe I even had the plane ticket to go up there to interview for some jobs up there, and I ran into a guy who was the California franchise representative for Ralph Lauren Polo. He and his wife, Bob and Maureen, went with us to Del Mar the day that Rosie won. We were close friends. I had offices in La Costa, which is North San Diego County at one time when Bob was, before we moved back to Florida, and Bob had offices there, and we became good friends. And so we took Bob and Maureen with us that day to the track. Well, later when I run into Bob somewhere, and he says, what's going on? I said, I think we're going to move to Eureka. He had moved over here to Rancho Mirage. And he said, Eureka, why are you going to do that? I said, well, I'm going to start a practice up there. He said, man, don't do that. He said, come on over to Palm Springs. I know a lot of lawyers over there. I'll get you started over in Palm Springs. Don't go to Eureka. It's crazy. And so I was buying a sports coat from Ralph Lauren Polo in Newport Beach. And he's the guy for the whole state of California, and he was in that store at that moment. That's where I ran into him. It's like doors opening and doors closing. Don't go there. Come over to Palm Springs. I'll introduce you around, and you'll do there. So I asked Barbara. She says, I don't want to go there. So Barbara said, I never want to move east of I-5. And here we are, 150 miles east of I-5. But she relented. So Bob said he would set us up or introduce us around, which he did. And so I started my practice on Highway 111 right at South Palm Canyon with a lawyer named Bob Schlesinger, and a distinguished lawyer, well known. I didn't work for him, but I had an office in his building, and he helped me with obtaining some clients and some work. And so our practice here sprung from that, and has gone on from there to those days to these days, which is still busy, but is not struggling, I would say, might be the right word.
And your practice is located where now?
I have offices in Indian Wells. I've now practiced for 35 years, board certified in family law, and I'm a sworn temporary judge in Riverside County and San Bernardino County, and recently an appointed mediator for Riverside County and family law matters. So most of those last things I told you about are not compensated with money, but compensated with much thanks and gratitude from the bar, at least.
Now, when you came here, how old were the kids?
Well, Rick was born in '68, and I reported to the Hawk in '71. So Rick was 3. Kelly wasn't born until '73. So I had gotten out of the NAV, and I was in law school. We were.
I mean, what year did you come to Palm Springs?
We moved to Palm Springs. I think it would have been 1980, 1981.
So the kids, were they out of school yet?
Rick was in middle school.
Okay.
Went to Ramon Street Middle School. Kelly was
Nellie Kaufman.
one of
Right.
those elementary schools.
Well, it was the middle school, I think.
But Barbara and the kids decided they didn't like 150 miles east of I-5. So Barbara said that she thought it would be a better idea if she and the kids went over to Del Mar and got appropriate accommodations at Del Mar, and then I would just come to the office and I would commute between Del Mar because all their friends and our school relationships were in Del Mar. And so we did that. We got a nice condo overlooking the ocean down on a road that's 1 block off the ocean that you can clearly see the ocean. It was a nice setup, but not a single family home. It was a condo, and we rented it. And I commuted, I'd say, until Rick graduated from Torrey Pines High School and got a scholarship in tennis to a college in New York, and went away to play college tennis. And Kelly by that time was in junior high or high school, freshman, and we moved over and rented a house in Indian Wells, where we lived until we bought a place in where we live now in Desert Falls.
Okay, yeah.
So that's the whole enchilada, I think.
That's great. And you have 2 grandchildren, I think you
Two
said?
grandchildren. Logan, who's age 4.5, be 5 in September. Just went to his end of season T-ball game, got 2 hits and scored 2 runs, and is now taking swimming lessons.
Yeah.
He's going to be a little dynamite.
No, I met Barbara over at your offices.
Uh-huh.
What does she do there?
The only thing that I do, Doctor, is I take out the garbage and I fill up the cars with gas and I do the law work. I do nothing else. Barbara does everything else. All I do, those are my duties. That I'm on the roster for the garbage and fill up the cars with gas and do the law work that has to be signed by a lawyer. She does the law work that doesn't have to be signed by a lawyer. Yeah. She does all the computer stuff. She's a teacher and got a lifetime credential in California, which she got by her degree from Florida. Learned computers when they were just becoming in. She's worked with me since Rick went away to school. That's 20 years ago, so she's worked with me for 20 years. She's a top-notch legal secretary, you know, and except for having the state bar number, she could run the practice, and does probably, you know, so I'm really lucky.
Getting close to my
Right.
tape going here, so maybe we might start wrapping it up. Anything else, Don, you'd like to add?
Well, I don't think so. It's really very interesting, and thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Well,
I think
I-
everybody's going to enjoy it.
I think
Your
there'll be-
family.
Now, see where I read. I usually, as I wrap this up, I like to ask veterans like yourself if you had any advice for young people that might be going into the service or potentially in harm's way for that matter. What might it be?
Well, if you're good in math and science, apply early for Annapolis Naval Academy or West Point. If you've made it to the officer ranks, if you're Catholic, go to mass, go to confession, stick with it, you know. Carry out your duties to the best of your abilities. Don't shirk any duties, and call them like you see them.
Sounds like good advice. Red, thank you so much for your service to our country.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for coming in and sharing with us today.
Well, thank you very much for sitting here, the captive audience,
Thank you, Red, for
and
your
listening to me
service.
for this time.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.